Chapter 141, A Bloody Upheaval. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Fei-Du wrinkled his brows as he saw the burn marks on his broken whip. And, a black flame like lightning could be seen emanating out of the cane in Xiaolang's hand. Hee. I didn't know that you've made such a huge progress in your witch-fire technique in such a short period of time. But, do you think that you can save your tribe from a warrior of the Heavenly Wolf tribe with your tiny trick? Fei-Du laughed coldly. Suddenly, his body started to emit an imposing aura. Then, his black fighter wolf looked up and howled loudly. Then, around 20 fighter wolves started to howl loudly. The foot soldiers also started to shout. Then, they all stepped forward. Suddenly, an invisible wave of strange fluctuations started to emanate out of their movements. Xiaolang's complexion sank as he looked at their imposing aura. He immediately recognized the famous and commonly used trick of the Heavenly Wolf tribe. He waved the cane in his hand. Suddenly, a black light was shot out of the cane. The black light then transformed into a black layer, and formed a barrier in front of his tribesmen. Suddenly, the invisible fluctuations surged up violently, and struck the black layer. The black barrier broke and scattered with a mild cracking sound. But, it didn't let the huge fluctuation pass through it. Xiaolang's face turned red. He drew a step backwards. Then, the black light on his cane dispersed. The men of the Flying Raven tribe looked extremely scared. So, they looked towards Xiaolang with hopeful eyes. However, they didn't budge from their places. Xiaolang, be smart. Don't try to oppose the Heavenly Wolf tribe. I'm giving you two options: either hand over the stuff that I've asked for, or let your entire tribe be exterminated. The choice is yours, Fei-Du spoke up with grim laughter. Xiaolang's complexion turned pale as he looked at the 20 or so totem warriors of the Heavenly Wolf tribe. 20 buckets of food grains is too much. I can only offer you 5 buckets of it. We don't have enough good wine and horses in this tribe. So, how can I offer you what you asked for? Xiaolang replied after he had given it some thought. Several men of the Flying Raven tribe became angry as they heard these words. They shouted out loudly once again. Xiaolang waved his hand to suppress the resentful voices of his tribesmen. Hee. 5 buckets of food grains? Xiaolang, do you think that we the people of the Heavenly Wolf tribe are beggars? We can't accept less than 20 buckets of food grains. All right. Our young master has his heart set on your daughter Shajiao since he saw her years ago. If you promise to grant your daughter a place of concubine in our young master's harem, then we won't take any food from you. And, she'll keep the honor of your Flying Raven tribe, Fei-Du suggested with an evil grin. Fei-Du, you're not satisfied with smaller gains. Our Flying Raven tribe is small, but it doesn't give you the right to humiliate and dishonor us. Xiaolang's complexion turned cold. He then replied in a stern voice. The clansmen of the Flying Raven tribe also lifted their weapons and shouted loudly. Very well then. You're most welcome if you are willing to die. Fei-Du's face had turned ashen. A cruel grin flashed at the corner of his mouth. He then waved his hand. More than 20 totem warriors of the Heavenly Wolf tribe turned into a flood of steel, and rushed towards the members of the Flying Raven tribe. 100 or more foot soldiers also dashed after them. Move back inside. Xiaolang commanded in a loud voice. He then recited an incantation. Suddenly, a thick black light started to appear around his cane. Then, a black cloud appeared in the sky with a quack sound. Dozens of black ravens rushed out like dozens of arrows from the sky. And, they shot themselves at the totem warriors of the Heavenly Wolf tribe. Those black ravens were extremely fast, their beaks were as sharp as awls. In fact, they looked more ferocious than the fastest arrows. Several totem warriors of the Heavenly Wolf tribe couldn't dodge this attack. The black ravens knocked themselves against them, and hit their legs and bodies. Several knights got knocked off from the back of their wolves. Blood started to flow out of the wounds of several totem warriors. An unlucky man was hit by one of the crows in his eye socket. His head was pierced by a long and sharp beak. This initial stage Houtian totem warrior screamed. Then, his body fell on the ground and rolled up twice. After that, it became motionless. Xiaolang recited the incantation once again. Then, black rays of light started to emanate out of his body. Suddenly, a light started to flash somewhere inside the flying raven tribe. And, this light surrounded Xiaolang's body at an incredibly fast speed. The black light rolled over Xiaolang's body, and took the shape of a black raven. Then, his cane started to emit bursts of red light. His complexion turned ruddy as the red light reflected upon his face. He shouted out loudly and thrust his cane forward. The cane darted at an extremely fast speed, almost 2 times faster than its usual speed. And, it went straight into the chest of a soldier of the Heavenly Wolf tribe, and pierced it. A black light emanated from the direction of their tribe once again. It entered into the body of the totem warrior of the Flying Raven tribe. But, this light was weaker than the black light that had been emitted by Xiaolang. The 2 men shook their sharp weapons in their hands. Then, a red light covered the weapons, and increased their attacking power. These 3 men rose and joined rest of the members of the Flying Raven tribe. And, they succeeded in resisting the attack of the Heavenly Wolf tribe at the cost of the lives of more than 20 of their men. Fei Du became furious. These 20 totem warriors were his right-hand men. They were equivalent to his private soldiers. So, it would be a great loss for him if they died. He bellowed loudly. Then, he waved his hand. And, a black light was shot out of his hand at a lightning speed. Xiaolang was fighting a middle-level Houtian warrior of the Heavenly Wolf tribe with the cane in his one hand, and a hammer in the other. Suddenly, his chest ached and his movements stopped. He lowered his face. And, his complexion suddenly turned pale. A big hole had been split open in his chest, a black burning wound surrounded it. Bang! A loud sound was heard. Meanwhile, the soldier who stood in front of Xiaolang bombarded his sledgehammer on Xiaolang's body. And, Xiaolang's body was sent flying in the air. Chief! The big blond man's complexion turned pale. He let out a loud cry. Suddenly, a black pike flashed like a poisonous dragon, and pierced the blond man's throat. Blood started to spurt out of his wound, and got sprinkled all over his body. This battle had already become lopsided. The last totem warrior of the Flying Raven tribe struggled for a few breaths, but eventually got killed by several totem warriors of the Heavenly Wolf tribe. The Heavenly Wolf tribe also lost several people. But, it didn't affect their position. The defense of the Flying Raven tribe was soon shattered by the Heavenly Wolf tribe. They then wielded weapons in their hands, and started to kill the ordinary clansmen of the Flying Raven tribe. Follow me, and catch whoever is alive. Fei Du jumped off his wolf and raised his blade. Then, he bellowed and rushed into the tribe. More than 100 barbarian foot soldiers followed after him. A sense of terror had enveloped the entire Flying Raven tribe. It was evening. Shi Mu, Sha Jiao, Sha Xing and others were on their way back to the tribe. Shi Mu was riding his David's deer. Sha Jiao and Sha Xing were riding on their horses side by side. And, a young yellow roebuck was hung on their side. Shi Mu held an egg-sized yellow ball in his hand. The ball looked like an ordinary stone, but it was emitting a strange aroma. Thanks to everyone for helping me catch this roebuck. Shi Mu put the yellow ball into a small bag and hung it on his waist. He smiled towards everyone, and cupped his hands in front of his chest to thank everyone around him. More than 10 people had spent a lot of effort to catch this fragrant roebuck beast. And, it had taken them the entire day. You're welcome, Brother Shi. It's normal for us the clan members of the Flying Raven tribe to help our friends, Sha Xing patted on his chest and replied in a loud voice. The other young clansmen also waved their hands. Then, they bid him goodbye in advance after they had chatted for a while. Sha Jiao was riding by their side. She looked a little lonely and was silent. Shi Mu didn't talk to her either. The group of youngsters arrived near the tribe in a lively mood. Suddenly, Shi Mu wrinkled his brows as his strong vision fell upon the black smoke that was rising from the direction of the tribe. A layer of thick black clouds seemed to float in the sky above the tribe. It looked strange. The hint of an unknown feeling rose in Shi Mu's heart. And, his complexion became pale. "Brother Shi, what happened?" Xiao had been secretly staring at Shi Mu. So, she was the first one to notice a change in his facial expressions. She asked hesitantly. "There's something unusual in the tribe, we need to speed up," Shi Mu replied with a dignified complexion. Other people's complexion changed as they heard this. They all looked in the direction of the tribe. But, they couldn't see anything with their ordinary eyesight. However, they increased their speed since they saw the seriousness in Shi Mu's expression. They soon arrived near the brook. Everyone was dumbfounded as they saw the scene in front of their eyes. The entire Flying Raven tribe had been wiped out. It had turned into ruins. The tents situated on either sides of the brook had burned down, and collapsed. In fact, some of the tents were still emitting smoke. Piles of corpses lay here and there among the ruins of the tents. Corpses of old men and women, children, and all the warriors of the Flying Raven tribe, lay beside the broken stone hammer and bone spears on the ground. Every familiar face had changed into a dead body. Several people had been severely cut into several pieces. It was evident that the murderers were exceptionally ruthless people. The ground on both sides of the brook was soaked in blood. It was even reeking of blood. The faces of Xiao, Xia Xing, and the others were filled with horror. They issued loud cries of despair as they saw this. Then, they jumped down from their horses, and ran towards the ruins of the tribe. "Father! Brother! Little sister! Boo, hoo! No, it can't be true!" Their faces were streaming with tears. They wailed loudly as they searched for their loved ones in the ruins. Shi Mu's body was also shaking, his face had turned as white as a paper. He had seen a lot of blood and gore in the battlefield in the past few years. But he was feeling a knife-twisting pain in his heart after having witnessing this gory scene. These barbarian people had been drinking, chatting, listening to music and dancing merrily last night. They were honest despite being poor. They didn't have good supplies, but they never gave up hopes. Everyone had prayed to the Raven God for his blessings, in the hope that he'd provide them with better resources and cattle in the following years. The David's deer also seemed to be scared. It issued a burst of restless noises, and started to dig the earth with its hooves. Shi Mu clenched his fists tightly. He then closed his eyes and took a deep breath. His face had now restored its tranquility. But, his eyes shone with bright and severe colors. He turned over to jump off from his David's deer. He then walked towards the tribe with his head lowered to gaze at the ground. Countless footprints were overlaid on each other on the ground. Moreover, there were innumerable footprints of people and wolves. He walked forward as he followed those footprints. Then, he looked at the barren land in front of him. The barren land was solid, but the large footprints were still faintly visible. There must have been over 100 people. And, it seemed that they had come from the southeast direction. But, the number of the returning footprints seemed to be double the original number. Cold and gloomy colors flashed in Shi Mu's eyes. He immediately understood the situation. He then turned around, and walked towards the tribe. Chapter 142, The Ruins. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Xiao and others were looking for their loved ones with grieved expressions on their faces. The environment of the wasteland was extremely nasty. It had made the barbarian children develop a strong and firm character. And, shedding tears was considered to be a shame. But, everyone's faces were drenched in tears owing to the uncontrollable pain in their hearts. Shi Mu walked over to them. He wanted to say some comforting words. But, he couldn't speak anything. Words seemed to be powerless at this moment. Father! Father! Suddenly, a burst of mournful cries echoed. It was Sha Jiao's voice. Shi Mu's vision brightened. He then looked in the direction where the voice had come from. It was the central square of the tribe. It was the altar where the sacrificial ceremony and the bonfire party had been held the last evening. However, the central square had changed beyond recognition. The statue of the raven god had also been smashed into pieces and scattered on the ground. There was a high and tall cross planted in front of the damaged altar. And, a barbarian man was nailed to it. Moreover, the man's entire body was studded with terrifying scars. It was the chief of the Flying Raven tribe. Sha Jiao held Sha Lang in her arms and shouted loudly. The condition of Sha Lang's injuries was extremely serious. However, he hadn't yet died, there was still a tiny bit of color on his face. Sha Xing heard the cry and rushed with a face full of tears. He didn't know where to find the axe or a blade so that he could cut the cross into halves, and free his father from that wooden frame. The steel nails were deeply inserted in Sha Lang's hands and feet. The nails were badly mangled, and had penetrated deeply into his flesh. Sha Xing didn't know how to pull them out without hurting his father. And, this revealed a great deal of anxiety on his face. Suddenly, Shi Mu's figure flashed, and arrived in front of the cross. He held Sha Jiao's hand. He's badly injured. So, you mustn't shake his body, Shi Mu said in a low voice. Sha Jiao was shaken up. Her body froze as she looked at her father. Shi Mu pulled Sha Jiao aside, and indicated Sha Xing not to act blindly without thinking. He then turned his hand and pulled out his black blade. He then sized up the cross a few times. Suddenly, his figure started to move around the cross. A black blade light could be seen flickering around the cross. Ka, ka, a few soft sounds echoed. Then, Sha Lang's body fell down from the wooden frame. The steel nails had been cut so skillfully that the skin of his hands and feet had been freed out of them. Shi Mu turned over his hand, and drew his blade back. He extended his hand to support Sha Lang's body at the same time. He then carefully laid his body on the ground. Father! Sha Jia ran towards Sha Lang's body. Sha Xing threw the broken chopper away, and knelt on the ground. Shi Mu had a dignified look on his face. He put a finger on the Sha Lang's neck to examine his situation. Then, Shi Mu's real qi penetrated into his body. Sha Jiao and her younger brother watched with a helpless expression on their faces. But, they didn't dare to disturb Shi Mu. Shi Mu withdrew his finger a few breaths later, his vision had turned deep black. Brother Shi, father, Sha Jiao trembled as she asked. Many of his internal organs are broken. His injuries are also very serious. It's a miracle that he has been able to sustain till now. But, saving his life is beyond my capabilities, Shi Mu said dimly. Sha Jiao's body became so fragile that she almost fainted. Sister, Sha Xing rushed towards Sha Jiao to hold her. Chief has a little consciousness left. I can stimulate the life force within his body to awaken him. But, it'll make his injuries erupt, and he'll die soon. Shi Mu looked at Sha Jiao and her younger brother. Then, he thought for a while and said. But, I'm afraid that he barely has a quarter of an hour to live. Even if he doesn't wake up now, you two decide what to do, Shi Mu sighed and said. Sha Jiao's body shook. She shot a glance at her brother's face. Then, she held Sha Lang's hand, and lowered head in silence. She then lifted her head after she had given it some thought. Shi Mu's complexion became pale. Sha Jiao's eyes were full of tears, but a sense of deep-rooted hatred flashed through her eyes. Brother Shi, please wake father up. I want to know who destroyed our tribe and killed our clansmen, Sha Jiao said. Sha Xing looked at Shi Mu with a similar look on his face. The tears on his face hadn't dried yet, but his eyes were firm. Shi Mu looked in Sha Jiao and Sha Xing's eyes and nodded. He then took out a white tiny bottle from his bosom. There was a white powdered medicine in that bottle. He let Sha Jiao give the medicine to Sha Lang. Then, he turned his hand to take out a green paper charm. It was the rejuvenating charm. Shi Mu then started to recite an incantation. He waved his hand, and placed the paper charm on Sha Lang's forehead. The rejuvenating charm emitted a green light, and this light then wrapped around Sha Lang's body. Some of his injuries began to recover slowly. His face also became a little red. But, it seemed a little better. Sha Jiao and the other people's face revealed a surprised look. A golden light flashed in Shi Mu's eyes. He then placed his finger on Sha Lang's chest. After that, he placed his finger on his lower abdomen, and several vital acupuncture points. Shi Mu made his spirit power take control of the art of breeding heavenly elephants with his real qi. He then divided it into several parts. After that, it slowly entered Sha Lang's body and stimulated his blood vessels. Sha Lang's body shivered. Then, he started to breathe heavily. He coughed a mouthful of blood, and slowly opened his eyes. An abnormal color appeared on his face, it seemed as if the sun was about to set. And, his face displayed the last radiance of the setting sun. Father! Sha Jiao and Sha Xing rushed over. Shi Mu stood up and walked aside without speaking a word. Jiao, Xing, you both are all right, very, very good. Sha Lang turned his head with difficulty, and looked at his children. A gratified look flashed in his eyes as he spoke in a weak voice. The other clansmen heard his voice, and surrounded him. They were immersed in sorrow. Their hands were empty and soaked in blood. But, it was clear that they hadn't found any other survivor. Father! Who destroyed our tribe? Sha Jiao recalled Shi Mu's words. She then grabbed Sha Lang's hand, and asked with a strong sense of hatred in her voice. Sha Lang's eyes flashed, and then became dim. The enemy is very strong, you can't handle it. Don't think of taking revenge, he said slowly. We're not afraid. Chief, we only have brave warriors in our Flying Raven tribe. We aren't cowards, a young man standing nearby yelled in an angry manner. We want revenge. A debt of blood must be paid in blood. Several other men bellowed. Sha Lang's expressions turned sad as he looked at the impassioned clansmen's faces. He forced a smile on his face. It wasn't that he didn't wish to take revenge. But, he knew that taking revenge from the Heavenly Wolf tribe would only bring death to his people. Father, it was the Heavenly Wolf tribe, wasn't it? Sha Xing said. Sha Lang was startled. The others stared blankly as well. As expected, Sha Xing slowly unfolded his clenched fist. Sha Lang noticed that he was holding several strands of finger-long grey hair of a wolf in his hand. Shi Mu wrinkled his brows. He hadn't been living with them for too long. But, he had got to know about the neighboring tribe's range of influence during his conversations with these people. The Heavenly Wolf tribe was the largest vicious barbarian tribe in the radius of 250 kilometers. They were widely known for their formidable strength and bloodthirsty nature. The other men had a trace of hatred in their eyes. Sha Jiao was repeatedly shaking her shoulders. She lifted her head after a while. And, her eyes seemed to be full of endless hatred. Jiao, in the name of priest of the Flying Raven tribe, hand over to you the status of the chief of this tribe. It's your responsibility to defend your clansmen, and protect your brother from now on. I make an oath to the Raven God, that if you would ever try to take revenge from the Heavenly Wolf tribe, then my soul shall be trapped forever in an endless pain. And shall never be allowed to get out of it. Sha Lang took in a deep breath, and spoke in a stern voice. Sha Jiao's complexion changed. Then, her delicate body trembled. She sat down on the ground with shivering lips. No. Father, you can't do this, she said in a trembling voice. Jiao. This my last command as the chief of the Flying Raven tribe, and as your father. Would you not listen to your father's last words? Sha Lang was emotionally moved. His chest moved up and down as he gasped for breath. He then said. Sha Jiao bit her lower lip. And, a drop of blood flowed out and fell on the ground. Yes, father. I promise you, she hung down her head and said slowly. This made Sha Lang relax. He extended his hand, and gently caressed Sha Jiao's head. He then smiled in a satisfied manner. The same applies to the rest of you. We live in the barbarian wasteland. The weak have been becoming a prey to the strong for thousands of years. Countless tribes had got vanished, and many are born every year. The fall of the Flying Raven tribe isn't a shocking thing. You only need to live carefully from now on, so that my soul can rest in peace. Sha Lang slowly swept his vision towards the young barbarians who stood around him as he said. His words gradually became more fluent. But, his complexion changed from red to crystal clear and lustrous. It then became a little transparent. The other people's hearts were filled with sorrow as they saw Sha Lang's face. So, they didn't wish to make any promises. But, they still complied in choking tones. Sha Lang relaxed as he saw this. Warrior Shi Mu, he then turned his head towards Shi Mu. Chief Sha, Shi Mu took a few steps forward, squatted down, and moved his head close to Sha Lang. Sha Lang smiled, and took a deep breath. Then, he vomited out a black spicule. It was half the size of a human fist. Sha Lang handed over the spicule to Shi Mu with shaking hands. Shi Mu's complexion became pale. But, he reached out and received it. Warrior Shi Mu, this is an inheritance of the Flying Raven tribe. It was made by some black magic of ancient times, and a secret totem art. None of these people including Jiao has black magic. So, I'm entrusting it to you. It might not be a precious thing for you. But, it's the most precious thing for our Flying Raven tribe. Sha Lang said. His complexion had become pale. He was gasping for breath. Shi Mu held the spicule in his hand with a strange look on his face. Chief, what do you want me to do with it? He asked slowly. The Flying Raven tribe is no longer a place to live. So, I want you to escort Jiao and others to the Tu Ho tribe in the quicksand wasteland in the southwest direction. Her uncle lives in a tribe of peaceful barbarians there. Sha Lang looked at Shi Mu and said. Shi Mu's face revealed a trace of confusion. He held the spicule in his hand and stood up. He looked all around, and saw the ruins and the dead bodies. And, he felt as if an awe was penetrating through his heart. You can rest assured. I'll take them to that place safe and sound. Shi Mu drew back his gaze, and promised in a serious tone. Sha Lang's eyes exposed a gratified expression as he heard this. But, most of the life force had already dissipated from his body by now. Everyone, I want to have some words with Chief Sha Lang in secret. Can you please excuse me for the time being? Shi Mu looked at Sha Jiao and the others as he spoke. Chapter 143, Vengeance. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Sha Lang looked at Shi Mu with a surprised expression on his face. He then moved his mouth slightly. The complexion of the surrounding people changed. And, they wrinkled their brows. Everyone could see that Sha Lang didn't have much time. So, they wanted Sha Jiao and Sha Xing to remain with their father in his final moments. I won't take much time. It'll only take a moment. Shi Mu's expression didn't change as he spoke up. The people of the Flying Raven tribe looked at each other in dismay, and then looked at Sha Jiao. Okay. Brother Shi. Please ask quickly whatever you wish to ask. Sha Jiao looked at Shi Mu. She then looked at Sha Lang and spoke in a soft voice. Then, she turned around to pull back Sha Xing, and started to walk over to a distant place. The other people followed them. Now, Sha Lang and Shi Mu were alone. Shi Mu sighed. He then squatted on Sha Lang's side and said softly, Chief Sha, I've just checked the footprints outside the tribe. The number of the footprints that has left the tribe is considerably more than what initially came in. Moreover, the number of dead bodies of women and children of your tribe seems low. Have the soldiers of the Heavenly Wolf tribe captured them?" Shalang's body shivered as he heard this. He then exposed colors of pain on his face. Warrior Shi Mu has sharp vision. Yes, it's true. Shalang was so powerless that I couldn't even save my clansmen. I let them fall into the hands of the Heavenly Wolf tribe. Shalang's emotions stirred up, his breath started to fluctuate. Shi Mu extended his arm and put it on Shalang's head. His real qi slowly turned into contagious filaments, and got poured into his head. This made Shalang's fluctuating breaths calm. Shalang looked at Shi Mu. His chest moved up and down. But, his eyes exposed traces of astonishment. The people of the Heavenly Wolf tribe must have left 12 hours ago. There are no traces of any carriages on the ground. It seems that the clansmen have escorted them on foot. And, since they took the women and the children, their speed mustn't be very fast. So, there's still time to catch up with them, Shi Mu said. He then took his hand back, and continued to speak after a moment's pause. I'm under the debt of the kind hospitality of your tribe. I can never return you the favor. So, I'll go and get back the women. Shalang listened to this with a strange expression on his face. He then opened his mouth, but didn't know what to say. I can tell from the footprints on the ground that there must be more than 100 of soldiers of the Heavenly Wolf tribe. But, I can't figure out their strength, and how many of them are totem warriors. So, I'm afraid that the odds won't be in my favor if I confront them without a careful consideration. So, I wanted to ask you, Chief Shat, Shi Mu said slowly. I appreciate Warrior Shi Mu's kind intentions. But, those Heavenly Wolf tribe people are large in number. So, I don't want to put Jiao's life in danger. And, how can I put an outsider in the path of harm? Shalang looked at Shi Mu. He then shook his head and said. This isn't really important. And, this is not a matter of life and death. I think that Chief Sha wouldn't endure to see the suffering of the women and children of his tribe. You've suffered enough humiliation by seeing your precious tribe fall into the hands of those vicious barbarians of the Heavenly Wolf tribe, Shi Mu said. I'll not be formal if Warrior Shi Mu says so. Thank you so much for this favor. Shalang looked at Shi Mu. And, his eyes exposed traces of thankfulness. Chief, you're welcome. Please tell me carefully about the enemy, Shi Mu respectfully asked. Then, he became ready to listen. Shi Mu stood up a moment later, and waved at Shajiao and the others. Shajiao and other people immediately rushed towards them. Shalang's complexion had now become ugly since it had no trace of color. Father! Shajiao bent over beside Shalang's body. She looked at his body, it had already dried up. Jiao, I entrust you with. Sha Xing and others, Shalang gasped for breath. He then lifted his arm as he wanted to gently caress his daughter's face for the last time. But, he had only lifted it halfway when he took his last breath. His arm then fell down to the ground. Shajiao let out a painful cry. Sha Xing was also crying. The other 10 barbarian youths standing around them tried to resist tears, but couldn't help sobbing. Shi Mu turned around and quietly walked out of the tribe. He left the ruins of the Flying Raven tribe behind to arrive near his David's deer. Shi Mu touched his waist to feel the sky-splitting bow. He then narrowed his eyes as he recalled Shalang's words. His complexion cleared up the next moment. He hopped onto his David's deer, and started to follow the footprints on the ground. Brother Shi! A shadow came running out of the crowd. It was Shajiao. Shi Mu wrinkled his brows, and pulled the reins of his David's deer. Are you going to chase after those men of the Heavenly Wolf tribe to rescue the captive women and children? Shajiao looked at Shi Mu and asked. Shi Mu's expressions didn't change. He turned his head towards a distant place. He didn't comment on her question, but whispered, I'm not sure if I would succeed. But, I want to try. Shajiao's vision flashed, and she clenched her teeth. She then moved the corner of her mouth, as if she wanted to say anything. "Your strength is too weak. I can't take you with me," Shi Mu spoke up before she could say anything. "You bury Chief Shalang's body carefully, and wait for a few days. I'll come back whether I'm successful or not," Shi Mu stated and turned his head away. He was no longer looking at Shajiao. The David's deer whinnied as Shi Mu shook its reins. It then moved forward its 4 hoofs, and started to run towards a distant place. Its speed was so fast that it disappeared in the distance very quickly. Shajiao saw Shi Mu's silhouette fading away in the distance. Her eyes flickered as if she was crazy. There was a hilly area about 5 kilometers away from the Flying Raven tribe. A group of 1 to 200 barbarian people could be seen walking forward. There were 20 head soldiers riding the wolves in the front of the group. There were hundreds of ordinary barbarians behind them. There were 100 or more women and children of the Flying Raven tribe walking along the cattle at the rear. The hands of these women and children were tied up by ropes. They had fearful expressions and faint stains of tears on their faces. But, they weren't speaking anything. They were merely moving forward in silence. The cattle were carrying the sacks of grains, dried meat, and earthen jars. And, the quantity was quite significant. The clansmen of the Heavenly Wolf tribe were returning after having plundered the Flying Raven tribe. They had looted their food as well as captured their women and children. The group was walking in a slow speed because of the children, women, and livestock. Apparently, there was no need to speed up. More than 20 wolf soldiers were riding at the front. Fei Du was leading them on a gigantic wolf with a proud expression on his face. He had completely wiped out the Flying Raven tribe in one go, and had robbed more good wine and food stuff than he had expected. He had lost a few men, but his chief wouldn't say anything after he had looked at the food stuff, and the women and children. Instead, he would reward him. His only regret was that he couldn't catch the daughter of the chief of the Flying Raven tribe Shajiao. The Lord is brave and unparalleled. This is the 5th small tribe in the past 6 months. He has accomplished a lot. The Lord is so strong that no one in our tribe can be compared with him. The chief had asked him a few things earlier. He seems to have fulfilled them in advance. A few relatives were walking beside Fei Du. They were flattering him with their words. He. It was very easy to destroy this small tribe. Fei Du knew that these men were taking advantage of the opportunity. But, he boasted and laughed out loud as he heard these flattering words. Lord Commander, there's still a matter which isn't clear. I've heard that the human race has slowed down in the Holy War. Then, why did the chief command us to collect food grains from these tribes? A totem warrior asked. Fei Du shot a glance at the man. His expressions became cold. The man turned his head as he realized that the question was inappropriate. He felt embarrassed and didn't say anything further. Fei Du also had some doubts regarding this question. But, the order was given by the chief of the Heavenly Wolf tribe himself. So, he hadn't dared to speak out of turn, or ask the reason. Moreover, he was fond of killing since he was bloodthirsty, and got good rewards for wiping out small tribes. So, he was in favor of these kinds of orders. Suddenly, a loud disturbance was heard in the last row of the group. The women and children who had been captured from the Flying Raven tribe were positioned in that row. Go and see what the matter is. Fei Du's complexion sank. A tall and sturdy totem warrior rode to the extreme end of the group. The complexion of the women and children of the Flying Raven tribe had become pale after they had walked for more than 12 hours. Their bodies were covered in dust as if they were withered. Blood was spurting out of their feet in a continuous manner. In fact, some young children had fallen to the ground. What's the matter? The tall and sturdy totem warrior shouted. Lord, we've been walking throughout the night. These slave women and children of the Flying Raven tribe seemed to have no energy left to walk further. An ordinary barbarian soldier came forward and reported. Can't walk further. The tall and sturdy barbarian smiled grimly as an ominous glint flashed in his eyes. He then wielded his whip, and hit a young woman of the flying raven tribe. Bang! A loud sound echoed. The young woman's clothes were torn from her shoulder as a deep whip scar got imprinted on her skin. The woman issued a loud scream as she fell to the ground, her body was shivering due to severe pain. The tall and sturdy barbarian's face exposed an evil grin. One of his brothers had died in the battle with the flying raven tribe. So, he had started to harbor an undying hatred for the people of the flying raven tribe even though he had personally beheaded more than 20 of their clansmen. These women were now considered to be the property of the heavenly wolf tribe. They would be either left as slaves in the tribe, or would be sold in exchange for some natural resources. But, there was no problem in beating them and venting out one's anger on them for a while. He lifted his arm once again, and waved it downwards. Suddenly, a black light flashed, and pierced the sturdy barbarian's throat as quickly as thunder. The tall and sturdy barbarian man seemed to be hit head-on. His body was removed from his wolf, and was sent flying in the air. He then fell to the ground with an enormous force. The tall and sturdy barbarian covered his throat with his hands. He looked around with an unbelievable expression on his face. He then issued a vague sound. Now, everyone saw what had happened. There was a finger-thick black arrow in his neck. There were feathers on the tail of the arrow. Half of the arrow had been sunk into his throat. And, the other half had been submerged into the ground, nailing the man to the ground. Blood started to pour out of the tall barbarian's throat. And, his expression eventually became pale. Chapter 144, To Kill by Ambush. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. The soldiers of the Heavenly Wolf tribe suddenly turned pale with fright. An arrow had come with a high speed towards them a moment ago. In fact, its speed was so high that they couldn't even see where it had come from. Then, a rumbling sound was heard. The 20 wolf-riding warriors at the front quickly rushed over. What happened? Fei Du asked in a firm voice. Suddenly, his eyes fell upon the dead body of the tall and sturdy barbarian lying on the ground. And, his complexion became rigid. The sound of a sharp whistle was heard. An electric light like an electric current was shot from somewhere. It entered into the chest of a wolf-riding warrior standing at the end of the group. He didn't get any time to react. And, his body was sent flying off from his wolf. This man also got nailed to the ground like the tall and sturdy barbarian had. The arrow had damaged his heart. He became motionless, and didn't make any sound. Over there. Fei Du was struck with a sense of understanding. He then turned his head, and pointed towards a distant place amidst the hills. A vague figure could be seen standing there. A youth in a black robe stood alone on the top of a small hill 3,000 to 4,000 feet away. He held a large yellow bow in his hand. It was Shi Mu. He had rode his David's deer the entire night without stopping to sleep or take rest so that he could chase after them. And, he had eventually caught up with the Heavenly Wolf tribe. Shi Mu's pupils had turned golden. He was looking into the distance towards the Heavenly Wolf tribe with ice-cold expressions. He drew out another arrow, and stretched the bowstring. Other wolf riders looked in the direction pointed by Fei Du. A black light was again shot from the sky-splitting arrow. The speed of the wind-chasing arrow was almost as fast as its sound. A black light flashed. It penetrated through the heart of a man among the wolf-riding warriors. And, he immediately got nailed to the ground. Use the shield to protect yourself, quickly. Fei Du shouted loudly with an ashen complexion. The hearts of the wolf-riding warriors were alarmed and their bodies were leaping. They hurriedly grabbed the black and round iron shields, and lifted them up in front of them. Foot soldiers, stay here. The rest of you, follow me quickly, Fei Du shouted. He urged his gigantic wolf to rush in the direction of Shi Mu. An arrow had come with the speed of lightning from the range of 3,000 to 4,000 feet a moment ago. It seemed that the arrow had been fired from a height of at least 50 feet above the ground. Each of these arrows had killed a man. This kind of a powerful bow rarely existed in the barbarian race. Moreover, no one could possess this kind of a vision even if one entered into the late stage of Hotian realm. It was possible that the remaining 20 wolf-riding warrior would be defeated in less than a few minutes if they didn't confront this warrior. Shi Mu sneered as he saw the wolf-riding warriors of the heavenly wolf tribe rushing towards him. He stretched his hand towards the sack of the arrows on his back, and drew out a long blue arrow, the wind-chasing arrow. Shi Mu bent the bow to put the arrow, and spread its string like a full moon. He bowed his body to pour his magic power into it. The sky-splitting bow emitted a burst of white light. Then, the wind-chasing arrow also got enveloped into the white light. Countless tiny charm characters wrapped up the arrow, and started to roll around it. Whiz! The long arrow transformed into a green phantom in a flash. Its speed was faster than the previous arrows. Bang! A loud sound was heard. The body of a barbarian wolf-riding soldier fell down even though he had lifted his shield. He got nailed to the ground just like the 2 other barbarians had. The iron shield in his hand was 3 inches thick. But, the arrow had penetrated through it while leaving a hole as if it was a thin piece of paper. Fei Du was startled as he saw the charm characters on the wind-chasing arrow. Suddenly, his pupils became shrunk. The witch arrow! The other wolf-riding warriors' complexions changed as they heard this. A few cowards pulled back, and stayed behind with their wolves. They didn't dare to rush forward. Don't stop, go on. If you disobey, then you'll be executed on the spot, Fei Du said in a stern voice. Those wolf riders now had no choice but to brace themselves and continue moving forward. But, they were complaining in their hearts. Fei Du's complexion became ashen as a thought crossed his mind. He couldn't understand who this terrible enemy was. But, it wasn't important where he had come from. What was important was his strength of pulling the bow. The bow must have used a lot of his physical strength. So, he might have to put down the bow several times. Moreover, the witch arrows were also precious. So, he mustn't have too many of them. Everyone, go separately and surround him, Fei Du commanded in a stern voice as he rushed towards Shi Mu from the front. He didn't have any shield for protection. He merely held a 5-foot-long black iron hammer to protect his body. And, that hammer was covered in a layer of black light. The wolf-riding warriors were the best warriors of the heavenly wolf tribe. However, they were no match for Shi Mu's strength. The wolf-riding soldiers followed Fei Du's command, and dispersed in different directions. They rushed towards the hill to surround Shi Mu from all directions. They covered a distance of 3,000 to 4,000 feet in a short period of 20 breaths owing to their wolves' speed. Shi Mu sneered as he saw this. Suddenly, he turned his head and raised the sky-splitting bow. His arm had started to feel numb after having fired 4 arrows back to back. He then opened his mouth, and busted a long and light whistle. Suddenly, a strange horse-looking creature with an ox's head and a deer's body rushed from the bushes from behind Shi Mu. It was his David's deer. Shi Mu jumped over the David's deer, and started to ride it. The David's deer changed its direction, and dashed towards a distant place. The David's deer's speed was a lot faster than the wolves. So, his opponent's move failed to make any impact. Fei Du's complexion turned extremely gloomy as he saw this. Whiz! Whiz! 2 sounds echoed at the same time as Shi Mu turned around, and shot 2 arrows. Then, 2 screaming sounds were heard. The shields in the hands of the 2 wolf-riding warriors had broken down. One of the arrows had hit one of the man's lower abdomen, and the other one had hit the other man's forehead. They both had flipped over, and fallen down. Fei Du's face turned ugly as a thought crossed his mind. He then shouted out loudly, "Keep on chasing after me." He then took out a palm-sized black animal skin from his bosom. An earthworm kind of a pattern was drawn on its surface. Fei Du exposed a trace of hesitation in his eyes, but it immediately faded away. He then opened his mouth, and bit the tip of his tongue. A spray of blood fell over the animal skin. He pulled the reins of his wolf, and arrived at the last row of the group. Suddenly, a black ray of light appeared on the animal skin. The pattern on it seemed to have become alive. Fei Du recited an incantation, it made the black light shine brighter. A rumbling sound was heard. The animal skin started to ignite with a loud bang. It then transformed into a 10 feet long black gigantic bird in a flash. Its entire body was igniting with raging flames. It then spread out its wings, and shot itself towards Shi Mu. Fei Du's face exposed an evil grin. But, his smile disappeared as he raised his head to look around. He had aroused the animal skin in a span of just a few breaths. However, most of the wolf riders had been killed by Shi Mu's arrows in that time span. Now, only 6 or 7 wolf-riding warriors were left beside him. "Evil man, you'll get what you deserve," Fei Du's face twisted as he shouted. He then rushed towards Shi Mu. Shi Mu had already killed more than half of the wolf-riding warriors. But he had used up the 13 wind-chasing arrows in his arrow sack. A frightened look flashed in his eyes as he saw the black gigantic bird rushing towards him. The black gigantic bird was moving extremely fast. It had caught up with Shi Mu in just 2 or 3 breaths' time. It then let out a loud whistling sound. And, its sharp burning claws grabbed at Shi Mu. Shi Mu shouted out loudly. Then, a black light flashed on his arm. His hand stretched out to his back, and drew out his black blade. He then raised it up towards the sky. A red blade light flashed, and collided with the burning claws of the black gigantic bird. A rumbling sound echoed. Shi Mu's body felt a huge vibration. A mighty power passed through his blade, and invaded his body, so much so that the black blade was nearly sent flying. The body of David's deer under him also stumbled, and almost fell to the ground. Shi Mu's heart trembled with fear. He exerted his hands, and got a tighter grip on the hilt of the black blade. The black fire bird was also jolted and went flying. But, it turned over and somersaulted in midair. Its strength had been reduced to more than half of its original. Then, it spread its wings, and came down rushing towards Shi Mu once again. Then, its black claws stroked 2 black flames in the air. Shi Mu poured the spirit power from his body into the black blade. And, the black blade let out huge flames in a flash. Shi Mu then brandished the blade, and forged ahead once more. He also threw out several blue magic charms with his other hand. Bang! A loud sound echoed. The black fire collided with the blade once again. 2 flames of black and red color flashed, and started to shake. Shi Mu had already activated several blue magic charms in his other hand by now. They exploded one after another. And, several white ice spears emerged out of them, and shot towards the black fire bird. The distance was very less. Moreover, Shi Mu had timed them in an extremely clever manner. So, these ice spears hit the body of the black fire bird with full impact. A crispy sound of crackling and rattling was heard along with a painful cry. The white ice spears had hit the body of the black fire bird. And, the ice spears had shattered into small pieces as a result of this collision. But, it had made the flames on the body of the black fire bird shudder. In fact, most of its illumination had dimmed down in a flash. Fei Du and the others took advantage of this opportunity, and caught up with Shi Mu. Shi Mu clenched his teeth, and moved his hands in a constant manner. Several magic charms appeared in his hand. A light flashed, and got transformed into a magic spell. Then, it hit the black fire bird with a flash of light. The fireball technique, the water arrow technique, the ice all technique, the tornado technique, and the falling thunder technique. These techniques had formidable power even though they were low-level techniques. Moreover, their numbers seemed to be infinite. Therefore, the black fire bird got submerged into the raging tides of these magic charms for a while. The black fire bird finally issued a loud wailing sound after a few breaths' time. Then, its body exploded, and transformed into a black light that filled the sky. Shi Mu let out a sigh of relief. However, an ear-piercing sound was heard from behind him. He turned around and realized that a white bone spear wasn't too far away from his back. And it was approaching with a burst of whooshing sound. Shi Mu held the neck of David's deer with his hands and lied down. A sneering sound was heard. The spear hit Shi Mu's back, and opened a hole in his body. Shi Mu hadn't yet understood its impact on his body when another lousy sound rose up in the sky. Another bone spear came flying, and struck him in his abdomen below the previous spear. Shi Mu couldn't avoid this attack. He held his blade, and put it behind his back. He then wielded it to resist the bone spear. Bang! A loud sound echoed. Shi Mu's body was sent out flying off from David's deer. He fell to the ground and rolled over. He became motionless, blood started to pour out of his wounds. It turned out he had been hit by the bone spear, and had received serious injuries. The David's deer was also horrified. It started to run at a very fast speed, it didn't even look back. In fact, it ran even faster than before. Fei Du gasped for breath with his head down. He put down his arms, and bent his body. He looked like a wolf with 4 limbs. He had used a flying meteor throwing technique of the heavenly wolf tribe to throw the spear towards Shi Mu. This had consumed a great deal of his physical strength. The remaining 6 wolf-riding soldiers issued cheerful cries as they saw this. They then rushed towards Shi Mu. Everyone wanted to be the one to kill such a dangerous enemy. The 6 people arrived near Shi Mu, and surrounded him. A cold light was issued as the raised blade fell off. Then, 6 blade cuts were issued almost at the same time, and created a tight net of deadly blades. The deadly net of blades then moved towards Shi Mu. And, it seemed that he would soon turn into a corpse. Chapter 145, Rescue. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Something strange happened at the last moment. Shi Mu lay motionless on the ground for a while. Then, he suddenly sprang up like an energetic fish. He then brandished his arms, and threw 2 handfuls of white powder on the 6 wolf riders. The 6 barbarians felt an acute pain as the powder entered into their eyes. And, they couldn't even open their eyes. It's not good! Fei Du shouted in his heart as he saw this. He got down from his giant wolf, and darted towards Shi Mu like a gigantic black kite. Shi Mu jumped up in the air, and took a quick rotation like a spinning top. Hoo! Hoo! A blazing flame burst out on the surface of his black blade. The flame looked dazzling like blazing fireworks in the air. Then, the spurt of flame flared up, and turned into a long blade light. It swept horizontally, and engulfed the 6 wolf riders. Chi! 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 The bodies of the 6 barbarians were cut into 2 halves at the waist with strange sounds. A spurt of blood gushed out, and sprayed around like a circular rain of blood. Ah! Fei Du had just arrived when he saw this tragic scene. He felt as if his eyes would burst out of their sockets. He bellowed ferociously. His 5 feet long iron hammer turned into a beam of dark green light in his hand. Then, the beam of light plummeted down towards Shi Mu's head with a burst of coarse whizzing sound. Shi Mu had barely landed on the ground. Moreover, he had used up a great amount of his stored strength in his previous strike. So, he couldn't dodge this attack. But, his mind was immediately set in motion. He clenched his teeth, and decided to seize this opportunity. He moved and took a quick rotation. His black blade transformed into a bright red light at the same time. Then, it moved forward to meet the hammer head-on. Clang! A dull sound of clanging of metals was heard as the hammer collided with the blade's edge. Shi Mu was forced to draw 3 steps backwards by its impact. He then steadied himself. However, his face was flushed due to exertion. Fei Du hadn't yet landed. He was still high up in the air. The impact of this collision had shaken him up, and had sent him flying backwards. But, he took a somersault in midair, and fell to the ground. His complexion changed. He realized that the arm he had held the green iron hammer with was numb and sore. His hammer looked ordinary. However, it was forged with several kinds of special ores. Those ores could only be found in the barbarian wasteland. Moreover, it was a very heavy weapon. It was almost 250 kilograms in weight. However, he deduced from the intensity of the collision, that his opponent's blade was equally heavy. He also estimated from the flow of qi emitted by Shi Mu, that his enemy was just a Hotian middle-stage warrior. May I know your excellency's identity? Why do you wish to attack our heavenly wolf tribe? Fei Du took a deep breath. He had started to consider Shi Mu to be their arch-enemy by this time. He stimulated his real qi in order to treat the numbness and tingling pain in his arm, and asked in a sinking voice. Shi Mu didn't show the slightest intention of giving him any reply. Instead, he stomped on the ground. And, a 1-foot-deep pit was formed with a muffled sound. He then rushed towards Fei Du at a lightning speed. It seemed as if his body had transformed into a black lightning. The red charm characters carved on the surface of his black blade lit up brightly at the same time. You're courting death. Fei Du's complexion darkened as he sardonically sneered. He was confident that Shi Mu's strength wasn't higher than that of a mid-stage Hotian warrior. But, he knew that Shi Mu possessed an extraordinary physical strength. Moreover, he had a special kind of a totem that was probably boosting his strength. Fei Du thundered loudly. The iron hammer in his hand flashed and transformed into 3 black hammer shadows. Then, the 3 shadows darted towards Shi Mu's head, chest, and lower abdomen. The golden gleam in Shi Mu's eyes flashed. His black blade shrouded with raging flames quivered. Then, the red blade light on his blade surface changed into 13 red shadows. And, these 13 shadows rolled out, and took the form of vortex of blade light. Then, the vortex engulfed the 3 hammer shadows. It's strange. You're not a barbarian. You're certainly a human. Fei Du's complexion changed. He shouted furiously as he witnessed the series of swift and skillful movements displayed by Shi Mu. He had fought against the human race on the battlefront for some time. He knew that the barbarians' martial arts were normally simple and crude. So, the barbarian warriors relied on their brute force to beat their opponents. But, these exquisite styled and skillful movements were something beyond their comprehension. The 3 hammer shadows twisted together with the 13 blade shadows. And, this collision produced a chain of loud metal clanging sounds. Fei Du had devoted a great deal of time in polishing his martial arts skills. But, how could they be compared with human race's cultivation art that could be changed repeatedly? The 3 hammer shadows flashed and dispersed. Most of the blade shadows had also been rooted. But, the remaining shadows attacked the hammer's hilt once again. A monstrous force was transmitted through the hammer's hilt. And, this rendered a powerful jolt to Fei Du's arm. In fact, he almost loosened his grip on the hammer. His eyes blazed indignantly as he issued a loud roar. His eyes then turned into a pair of spooky green eyes, and started to emit a cold, frightening aura like a wild beast. His body started to become inflated at the same time. His hands and feet became thicker, almost twice their normal size. And, a layer of green hair sprouted on his palms. Then, his fingernails took the shape of faint green sharp claws. They started to release a menacing aura. It seemed that Fei Du had resorted to the strength of his totem. Therefore, his strength had increased by 50%. Even the hammer in his hand stabilized as he tightened his grip. The iron hammer transformed into a deep green lightning as he waved his sturdy arm. Then, he pounded it on the black blade with an overwhelming force. This force could be compared with a bolt of lightning. The black blade was swept back with an earth-shaking loud rumble. Even Shi Mu staggered a few steps backwards by this gigantic impact. An ominous glint streaked across Fei Du's eyes. He seized this opportunity, and pounded his hammer forcefully in an attempt to crush Shi Mu's head. Suddenly, Shi Mu opened his mouth and spouted out a ball of white qi. The ball darted towards Fei Du at a lightning speed, and pounded on his face. Bang! The cloud of white qi blasted as Shi Mu shouted. It then transformed into a mass of white lights, and enveloped Fei Du's face. And, blood started to spurt out from his face. The Qi explosion technique couldn't pose any danger to someone who was already at the Houtian consummate stage. However, it had wounded Fei Du's head and face rather considerably. Fei Du issued a pitiful screech. However, he reacted extremely fast since he was under the powerful effect of his totem. His injured face wasn't big deal for him. His legs hit the ground. He was then shot backwards. Shi Mu also pushed the ground, and swept backwards. Meanwhile, his left hand moved, and ejected a curved silver dagger. The dagger whirled, and flew ahead. Fei Du was still under a fit of dizziness. So, he couldn't see the dagger. But, he could hear a buzzing sound of the dagger approach him with a frightening speed. It sounded like a whistle that could only be produced by some sort of a hidden weapon. He wielded his hammer, and struck the curved dagger with absolute precision. A thunderous sound rang out. The silver dagger burst into a huge red-colored mushroom-shaped cloud. Then, the cloud shrouded Fei Du from all directions. Shi Mu sneered. He was quite familiar with the terrifying might of the moonlight sea urchin. Unfortunately, this was his last dagger in the barbarian's wasteland. He knew that he couldn't have another one for a while since there was no way that he could find someone in this land who could forge these special daggers for him. A mournful scream was heard from the mushroom-shaped cloud. Suddenly, Fei Du rushed out of the exploding red wind, and fled towards a distant place. His entire body was on fire. He was covered in blood. In fact, he was so severely burnt that it was impossible to see his original appearance. Whiz! A black blade light whizzed through the air, and caught up with Fei Du. It penetrated into his back up till its hilt, and nailed him to the ground. A spurt of blood splashed out from his back. Shi Mu then slowly lowered his strained arms. The place between his right thumb and index finger was bleeding heavily. He had received this injury when he had been shaken to fly by Fei Du's hammer. He walked towards Fei Du. He saw that Fei Du's body had been badly mutilated by the moonlight sea urchin's explosion. He slightly stroked Fei Du's chest, and realized that he wasn't breathing. Shi Mu grinned sardonically as he pulled out his black blade. He then fiercely wielded it, and cut off Fei Du's head. This man was the prime culprit who had exterminated the entire Flying Raven tribe, along with its chief. Therefore, his head was needed to pay tribute to the souls of the slaughtered barbarians as per the customs of their race. Shi Mu tore off Fei Du's clothes, and wrapped them around his head. Ping! A small bundle wrapped in a black cloth dropped from Fei Du's clothes. Shi Mu frowned. He then carefully picked up the bundle. He opened the parcel, and saw a thick wad of golden leaves inside. A fist-sized black cylinder-shaped object was also present inside the bundle. It was nearly half a foot long. Shi Mu's face beamed with happiness. The wasteland was considered to be pretty rich in gold. Therefore, the barbarians relied on gold for all kinds of business deals. These golden leaves were huge in number. In fact, they could be considered to be a huge amount of wealth. Shi Mu had plenty of silver notes and other stuff when he had set foot in the wasteland. But, the silver notes weren't accepted in this land. So, most of his other stuff had been used up in exchange for bone-tempering pills and other materials. Now, he could easily replenish his supplies in the barbarians' markets with the help of these golden leaves. He carefully kept the golden leaves. Then, he picked up the black cylinder. The front area of the cylinder was extremely cold. It seemed to be made up of a special metal. His facial expressions changed as he examined it closely. He then carefully turned it over. There was a small hole at the bottom of the cylinder. It was the size of a small finger. Suddenly, Shi Mu's shocked face brimmed with overwhelming joy. He hadn't paid any attention to this object earlier as he had presumed it to be a container. Who could have thought that his presumption would be wrong? There was a long story attached to this object. And, it was an extremely deadly secret weapon. He had once seen it in the secret arts of the Zhong clan. It was called the Black Locust Firing Tube. It was ranked far above the Moonlight Sea Urchin dagger. However, it could only be used within a radius of small distance. Moreover, it required a great deal of preparation time to stimulate it. Shi Mu's heart was overwhelmed with extreme happiness. He was in urgent need of an effective hidden weapon since he didn't have a single Moonlight Sea Urchin dagger left with him. Therefore, he decided to conduct a thorough examination of this object later on. He stored it with great care. Then, he rode the David's deer, and retrieved the 13 wind-chasing arrows. He also collected the treasures that he could find on the riders' bodies. And, he found several broken gold pieces therein. Over 100 ordinary soldiers of the Heavenly Wolf tribe were anxiously looking into the distance under a hill. It had been half an hour since their leader had chased after the mysterious archer along with the other totem warriors. They had heard faint fighting sounds in the beginning. But, they could only hear a dead silence at this time. In fact, it felt as if the 20 wolves had been swallowed up by someone. Therefore, the barbarian soldiers eventually started to panic. Suddenly, a shadow appeared on a faraway hilltop. And, he was galloping towards them at a lightning speed. The barbarian soldiers became fearful as the shadow approached closer to them. The soldiers saw a man riding a strange ominous beast. His face was covered with a mask. There was a black blade hung on his shoulder. They quickly understood that he wasn't a wolf rider. The soldiers' complexions changed. How couldn't they anticipate this situation? Whiz! 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 A number of black arrows were shot by the mysterious man towards them. Each of the arrows struck a soldier with a mighty force. In fact, some arrows killed 2 soldiers at the same time. Around 10 barbarian soldiers were killed in a flash. Run! The Heavenly Wolf tribe's soldiers broke into a chaos. Dozens of wolf riders were slaughtered in a couple of seconds. But, they didn't have the courage to confront this mysterious man. So, they started to flee in all directions. And, the entire area had been emptied in a fleeting moment. Only the captives who hailed from the Flying Raven tribe were left behind. They were gazing at Shi Mu blankly. Shi Mu arrived before the captives, and took off his mask. You're warrior Shi Mu. Most of the women were familiar with Shi Mu. Therefore, they exclaimed joyfully, while the children smiled through their tears as they saw Shi Mu. You people have gone through a lot of suffering. I'm here to rescue you. Shi Mu jumped down the David's deer and spoke up. The women were dumbstruck for a moment. Then, they broke into cheerful shouts. Many of them hugged each other as they shed tears of joy. They had witnessed the miserable scene of their tribe's destruction. However, they were happy because they wouldn't be tortured to live the life of a slave anymore. Thank you so much, brave warrior Shi Mu. You're indeed the ballad who was sent by our raven god for our rescue. The barbarian women had finally calmed down. They bowed to Shi Mu respectfully along with their children. Traces of respect and gratitude gleamed across their faces. They had just witnessed Shi Mu's illustrious strength. He had killed over 20 wolf riders by himself. Therefore, Shi Mu had engraved a profound impression in their hearts. In fact, he had become the messenger of the god in the eyes of these people. Don't mention it, Shi Mu waved his hands, and replied in a calm manner. Chapter 146, To Meet with a Hidden Misfortune. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Let's move, this place isn't safe. We can't stay here any longer. I'll lead you back to the tribe, Shi Mu spoke up as he glanced in the direction where the Heavenly Wolf tribe's soldiers had escaped. Warrior Shi Mu, our tribe, what's the situation there? A young barbarian woman asked in a hesitant manner. The women then gazed at Shi Mu as they heard this. There were traces of apprehension and expectations in their eyes. Shi Mu hesitated for a moment. Then, he gave a brief account of their tribe's situation. He also told them that Shajiao and the other youths were safe. But, he informed them about Shalang and the other tribesmen's death. The women became silent. Then, their faces revealed a relieved look. Shi Mu was startled. But, he understood their strange behavior the next moment. The women already knew that the Flying Raven tribe had been annihilated. But now, they had Shajiao as the new chief of their tribe. Moreover, they now had an explicit destination to go to. These factors had triggered a hope of revival in their hearts. The barbarian people had grown up in extremely adverse conditions. So, these women considered themselves to be lucky since they had survived the attack of the Heavenly Wolf tribe. The women and the children looked extremely exhausted because they had been moving since a long time. Some of them even had serious wounds. Shi Mu discarded some of the goods and materials. Then, he made arrangements for the wounded women and children to be carried on the animals. And, they eventually started to advance towards the Flying Raven tribe. Shi Mu, Shajiao, and around 100 people of the Flying Raven tribe reached the Tu Huo tribe situated in the quicksand wasteland after several days. Shi Mu helped the people of the tribe to settle down there. Then, he bid his farewell and departed from there. Everything in the vast wilderness of the wasteland looked dusky. There were rolling hills of varying height in the distance. They were faintly visible in the shivering cold sandstorm. A group of a dozen or more barbarian cavalry soldiers slowly approached from the eastern direction. They were struggling through the sandstorm as they advanced towards the west. These barbarian cavalry soldiers had small statures in comparison to the barbarians' standards. They had some bone weapons that hung from the reins of their horses. In addition, they held various kinds of weapons made of iron. 3 barbarian people were riding abreast on the front row of this group. 2 of them were strongly built. They were walking on either sides in the front row. A young girl was walking in the center. She looked delicate and petite. However, the small group seemed to be headed by her. The girl had simple yet delicate facial features. She seemed to be around 20 years old. She wore a striped jacket that was made up of a leopard's skin. Her thick braided hair swung up and down along with the gallops of her horse. She had a dusky complexion, but her firm forehead revealed her rich experience and bubbling heroic spirit. She looked exceptionally beautiful as she rode her horse. "Sister, according to this map, we'll soon enter the territory of the Dagger Bull tribe. So, do we need to make a detour?" A young man turned his head and asked. He was walking on her left. He was a tall youth with heavy facial features. He had big eyes and bushy eyebrows. He held a long silver spear in his hand. "There's no need for that. We've limited time on our hands. We've already wasted plenty of time while avoiding the vicious barbarians' tribe. Besides, the Dagger Bull tribe is a peaceful tribe. They don't harbor any grudge against the human race. So, there shouldn't be any problem as long as we're cautious." The girl shook her head and replied. Her face emitted a capable and experienced aura, which seemed quite inharmonious with her age. The tall youth complied. He was about to turn his head when the girl's voice resounded again. "Brother Ling, we've been moving constantly for the last 7 to 8 days. But, we haven't come across any water source. I'm afraid that our drinking water won't support us for a long time. You should go and look around. There might be some water source in the vicinity." "Hee. Sister, just relax. According to this map, there should be a small lake ahead. It shouldn't be far away from here. It's one of the largest water source in the radius of 150 kilometers. I'll be back soon." The youth named Leng laughed. Then, he fiercely pressed his horse's belly from both sides. His horse neighed loudly, and speedily galloped forward. They quickly disappeared from the girl's line of sight. Only a floating trail of dust could be seen along the path. A muffled voice of a male resounded in the girl's ears after a short while. "Princess, do you really think that the human race and the barbarian race will sign off a peace agreement? What are the chances of our success?" A middle-aged man led his horse near the princess, and asked in a low voice. He had robust facial features. He held a long hilted axe in one of his hands. His entire body exuded an extremely profound aura of an overwhelming strength of a Xian Tian realm warrior. The vicious barbarians encourage war, while the peaceful barbarians advocate peace. So, there's 50-50 chance of our success. The standpoint of the barbarians' high priest becomes highly significant in this situation. General Zhang, don't worry. We should wait until we arrive at the holy mountain. Then, we should seize the opportunity, and present our proposal to him. But, I believe that the barbarian race is also unwilling to sit back and watch the sea race reap profits from our losses. But, we might not get hold of the 3 frontier fortresses of our Dachi kingdom even if we succeed in forming a peace agreement with the barbarians. The girl considered for a moment. She then replied in a non-committal tone. General Zhang chimed in a sinking sound. He then tightened his grip on the long-hilted axe. He didn't say anything else. The girl pushed her horse to move forward. Her eyes flickered as she looked up at the gloomy sky. But, it was difficult to figure the thoughts that were bubbling up in her mind. The youth surnamed Lang returned after a quarter of an hour. He had returned with the exact location of the nearby lake. The group of the cavalry soldiers steered their course, and rushed towards the lake after they had received the princess's order. Several patches of dark green grasses gradually began to appear on the sandy land of the gloomy wasteland. It looked like a large piece of green carpet that had been spread out on the ground. A small lake soon appeared in their line of sight. Its surface was as smooth and flat as a surface of a mirror. It was several dozen feet wide. These people had been on a move since several days. So, they were extremely exhausted. They hadn't seen such a tranquil and limpid lake for a long time. Most of them were fired up. They impatiently rushed towards the lake. They pulled out the leather sacks that hung on their waists. They were brimming with excitement since they had finally got the chance to refill their water containers and clean their bodies. The girl and the 2 men stayed behind. They pulled the reins of their horses, and moved at an unhurried pace. They seemed to be engaged in a discussion. Suddenly, something strange happened. Bang! A splash of water was heard. The water surface in the center of the lake started to bulge. Then, it exploded. The 10 feet wide stream of water shot up into the sky. It seemed as if a whale was spouting water. But, it halted after it had reached a height of 60 feet. Then, the surface of the water started to whirl. A face covered in a hideous silver shark mask emerged on the surface of the water. Then, a masked youth with a green whip in his hand gradually appeared. He stood proudly on the surface of the water like a sculpture. He looked at the crowd with a pair of cold eyes. The sky was blotted with a mountainous wave as soon as he appeared. He stood firmly in the center as the mighty waves spread in all directions. The wide lake seemed trivial under the pair of invisible gigantic hands. The entire lake caved in several meters by those giant hands in a flash. And, a shiver ran down the spines of the people present on the scene. Suddenly, the surrounding air turned extremely viscous. A vicious killing aura pervaded the air, and engulfed almost everyone present on the spot. The youth surnamed Leng and General Zhang's complexion changed. The wisp of an apprehensive and terrifying feeling surged up in their hearts. They didn't take long to understand that such a terrorizing killing intention and imposing aura could never be achieved by any Xian warrior. This masked man was extremely formidable. He ought to be an Earth-grade warrior. The girl's complexion also changed. But, she quickly regained her poise. She loosened the reins of her horse, and moved a step forward. After that, she touched her chest with one hand, and bowed to the mysterious man. Then, she asked with an unperturbed face, "Respected brave warrior of the sea race, where the guarding cavalry soldiers of the Green Teeth tribe? If you recklessly slaughter the barbarian people, won't it ignite the war between the barbarian race and the sea race? Don't tell me that you don't care about this matter." The facial expressions of the people of the ambassador group looked relieved as they heard these words. They had almost forgotten that they were disguised as barbarian cavalrymen. The masked man looked at the young girl in leopard jacket. A glint of astonishment flickered across his eyes. But, it instantly changed into a ridiculing expression. He then gently raised his long green whip. The charm characters carved on the surface of the whip shone brightly, and emitted a dazzling green light. It's not good. Lang Yingji, hurry up and escort princess to a safe place. General Zhang bellowed loudly. He then sprang up from the ground and hacked his long axe at the man's mask with all his strength. Hoo! Hoo! Suddenly, a 10 feet long weapon appeared in the air. It was a gigantic axe that was condensed with real qi. It was blood red in color. The tip of the axe was emitting an inexhaustible flow of imposing aura. Qi! Qi! A strange sound was heard. Then, a dozen or more bone spears whizzed towards the masked man with air-piercing sounds. The masked man stretched out his left hand and shot several green lights. The green lights proliferated in all directions, and formed an almost transparent layer of green light shield around his body. Puff! Puff! A series of sounds resounded in all directions. The overbearing bone spears turned into ashes as soon as they came in contact with the light shield. The blood-red gigantic axe also got stuck as it hit the green light shield. It trembled a few times, and then burst into a cloud of blood fog. Then, it dispersed into the air. The girl had mounted her horse the moment General Zhang's loud voice had resounded. So, she had already fled dozens of feet away by the time the first round of attacks had ended. The youth surnamed Lang had also accompanied her. The silver spear in his hand was glittering to shield her from an unseen attack. Since you all have come so far, then don't leave right away. An overwhelming fear crept into everyone's hearts as they gazed at the masked man. The long green whip of the masked man began to coil up in the air as he flicked his wrist. It quickly took the form of a green vortex. This vortex was made up of real qi. An intermittent burst of hissing sounds spread from the green vortex. Then, a gigantic snake-shaped green beast rushed out of the green vortex. It was almost 50 feet long. The snake beast wasn't exactly a snake since it had a pair of wings on its back. It swooped down on the human riders who stood by the lake. It darted towards them at an unimaginable speed. The green light flashed, and appeared in front of the humans. There was a Hotian primary stage warrior in this group of ambassadors. He thundered indignantly. The long blade in his hand shot out a blade light that hacked at the beast in a ferocious manner. But, the giant green snake was extremely clever. It swiftly dodged the attack. After that, it flashed and submerged in the warrior's chest. A dull thumping sound was heard. The warrior's body swelled up and exploded. And, his blood showered around like a rain of blood. Only his legs were left standing on the ground. The other human warriors met the same fate. Their bodies exploded as the green snake invaded them. Then, they transformed into clouds of blood fog in midair. The air was soon filled and pervaded with a pungent smell of blood. Streams of blood could be seen all over the place. Only the Xiantian warrior General Zhang's long-hilted axe danced in the air vigorously. The red shadows of his axe could be seen around his body. He had barely managed to keep out the monstrous snake from intruding into his body. However, the other human warriors had met their end within a breath's time. Meanwhile, 2 more giant green snakes transformed into 2 green shadows, and darted towards the princess and the youth surnamed Lang, but, they hadn't yet covered a long distance. A startled look flashed across Lang Yingji's eyes as he saw this. The last trace of hesitation also vanished from his eyes as he turned back to look at the girl. Suddenly, the silver spear in his hand dazzled like the sun. And, the charm characters carved on the surface of the spear started to throb wildly. Boom! A loud rumble was heard. The silver spear exploded and turned into innumerable luminous dots. They were silver in color. Then, those luminous dots integrated into a silver light. The silver light ruptured, and transformed into a silver flame that greeted one of the giant snakes. Lang Yingji's complexion turned red as blood rushed to his face. He then thundered and pounced on the other giant snake. Bang! An explosive sound was heard. An invisible airwave surged up violently like a hurricane. 3 rays of light glittered at the same time, they were blood red, silver, and green in color. A small green snake almost half an inch in size fled from the glaring rays of light and shot towards the princess. The youth surnamed Leng had vanished into thin air by this time. However, there was a pool of blood in the place where he had stood a moment ago. Chapter 147, The Oasis Encounter. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. The young girl deduced a dangerous aura approach her from behind. She seemed to have figured that it was futile to escape. Therefore, she pulled on the reins to stop her horse. Then, she dismounted from the horse. She turned around, there was a golden token in her left hand. The token was covered in charm characters. She then stimulated her real chi. A thin layer of golden light began to bubble up on the surface of the token. The small green snake had already arrived extremely close to her. But, the girl had an unperturbed expression on her face. She exerted the entirety of her might to activate the golden token in her hand. Suddenly, the word prisoner emerged on the surface of the token in vague letters. A strange gleam flashed across the snake's eyes. It flashed as it was about to submerge into the girl's body. Suddenly, a green beam of light flashed in front of the girl's body. There was a necklace with a bright green jade pendant hung around the girl's neck. That pendant exploded, and congealed a green light shield that wrapped around her body. Then, a profound wood attribute aura rippled and pervaded the air. Boom! A loud rumble was heard. There was a fierce collision between the two green colors. The drizzly radiance of the girl's shield gradually faded away. The snake had also barely survived the explosion. But, its size had been reduced to a thumb size. However, it rushed towards the girl. The girl's eyes revealed a trace of apprehension. Her right hand moved towards her waist. Then, a misty white cold aura radiated. And, a sword light rushed forward at a lightning speed in order to welcome the attack. The misty white sword light soared as it banged against the snake beast. A large number of snowflakes emerged in the air. A layer of grayish-white frost got condensed around the snake beast's body. Then, a sword light was shot towards the snake. Ping! The frozen snake was smashed into smithereens with a thumping sound. Then, it melted into thin air. However, the girl felt a formidable real chi being transmitted through her sword. It invaded her body. This rendered an acute pain in her stomach and organs. She couldn't bear this overwhelming pain. She opened her mouth, and spurted out a mouthful of blood. Her complexion became deathly pale. She still held the golden token in her hand. The word prisoner had grown exceptionally clear on the token's surface by now. Meanwhile, near the lake, the masked man seemed surprised as he saw Lang Yingji's action. Moreover, he was amused by the admirable strength that the girl had displayed while resisting one of his blows. But then, the green whip gleamed in his hand once again. General Zhang finally exterminated the green snake that had been pestering him. However, he had to sacrifice one of his arms and detonate his long-hilted axe. Suddenly, he noticed that the masked man was preparing his next attack. His eyes blazed as he said, "This old man has had enough with you." Then, his real chi gushed out of his body. His figure flashed, and surmounted over 100 feet distance in an instant. He then pounced on the masked man. A blood-red light congealed in the air at the same time, and took the form of a gigantic fist in front of his body. It was then pounded ferociously towards the masked man. The masked man didn't even look at General Zhang. The long green whip in his hand flashed, and coiled around General Zhang's body in midair like a strong viper. The whip gradually started to tighten up. Puff! General Zhang's body burst out with a light sound, and turned into a mass of blood fog in the air. He didn't even get a chance to issue a pitiful screech. General Zhang's blood-red gigantic fist was rooted and dispersed with a loud rumble as he died. It had arrived very close to the masked man. General Zhang had formed this gigantic fist by extracting every last bit of his real chi. The masked man then shifted his gaze towards the princess. One of her hands had been held up. Suddenly, a golden light dot flashed past her hand. The masked man had a premonition of imminent danger. He didn't feel good in his heart. But, he didn't have enough time to respond. Suddenly, he felt a violent fluctuation of airwave around his body. It was followed by 100 or more fine golden light strings that emerged out of thin air. They were as fine as a strand of hair. The golden light strings quickly intertwined with each other, and took the shape of a glorious golden light prisoner's cage. And, this luminescent cage imprisoned the masked man. The masked man had just seen a dazzling golden light. Then, he had lost all links with the outside world in a flash. He was startled and infuriated at the same time. He tried to disperse the green light shield that was wrapped around his body. Bang! An explosive sound was heard. The charm characters on the golden cage flashed. Then, the entire cage trembled. But, it still held him inside. The masked man was enraged. Suddenly, the green whip in his hand emitted a bright green light as he flicked it. Then, several green strange snakes appeared out of nowhere. They then started to swoop down on the golden cage from inside. A loud boom was produced every time the strange snake submerged into the cage. The radiance of the golden cage gradually began to become dimmer. The golden cage finally gave up. Now, it could no more hold against the continuous attacks of dozens of green snakes. It exploded with a loud sound, and changed into glittering crystal light. The masked man finally unshackled himself from the cage. But, his facial expressions turned unsightly the next moment. He noticed that the girl along with her horse had disappeared without a trace. Moreover, he couldn't figure the secret technique she had used to conceal her tracks in their entirety. In fact, he couldn't sense the slightest aura in the vicinity. In the Gobi Desert, the blazing sun was high in the sky. The ground was scorching hot. The temperature was extremely high. Several scalding airwaves were rippling in all directions. A tall person's silhouette could be faintly seen. He was clad in a grey cloak. He was advancing in a certain direction on a David's deer. The David's deer seemed to be moving in a slow and sluggish manner. However, it was taking a stride of 10 feet every time it plunged its hoofs into the sand. So, they were advancing forward at an astonishing speed. The surrounding scenery flashed past their sight quickly. Suddenly, the David's deer stopped as the grey-cloaked man pulled its reins. It raised its head like it had his own intelligence, and looked towards the grey-cloaked man. Then, it issued a moo sound. The young man lifted the cape from his head and revealed his face. It was Shi Mu. He narrowed his eyes, and his pupils turned pale golden in color. He looked towards the ground, and then looked far ahead into the distance. "Let's go in the southeast direction," he shook the reins, and spoke up after he had pondered for a while. The David's deer seemed to have understood Shi Mu's words. So, it turned and started to advance in the said direction. After half an hour, a medium-sized oasis appeared in front of their eyes. It was dozens of feet wide. It was shrouded with verdant and thick trees. Some of the trees bore clusters of fruits. There was a fairly large lake in the oasis. The water surface of the lake was tranquil. It didn't have a single ripple, as if a smooth mirror. Shi Mu beamed with happiness. He nodded. Moo! Moo! The David's deer also issued a cheerful cry as it saw the oasis and the lake. It quickened its pace, and advanced towards the oasis. The David's deer drank water to its heart's content as soon as it arrived at the oasis. It then swayed its tail merrily. Shi Mu also walked to the edge of the lake, squatted down and scooped some water into his palm to drink. Then, he took out his water container and started to fill it. He stood up after a while, and looked at the tranquil surface of the lake. It seemed as if he was lost in some thought. It had been almost a month since he had bid his farewell to the tribesmen of the Flying Raven tribe. He had been practicing during the daytime, and forging ahead during the night. He had made a breakthrough to the 6th stage of the art of breeding the heavenly elephants. He knew that he could only achieve this feat because of the especially made cup of wine Shalang had offered him earlier. That wine was made with the gallbladders of a yellow python. Therefore, his physical strength had undergone a substantial promotion. His strength would be equivalent to an official Hotian advanced stage warrior once he forged ahead to the 7th level of this art. However, the matter crucial at the moment was to find the fiery snake tribe as soon as possible. Only then he could get hold of their totem art. Shi Mu realized that the inhibition and masking effect of the unicorn viper's blood had gradually become weaker. It was because of the increasing frequency of the eruption of the snake totem that he had on his chest. Therefore, he had been on a constant move for the last few days, irrespective of the time of the day. He intended to reach the fiery snake tribe at the earliest possible. Suddenly, Shi Mu's complexion changed, and his ears moved a little. He could faintly hear a series of weapons clashing sounds in front of the oasis. It seemed that some people had been caught up in a fierce battle. Shi Mu's complexion became dignified. He pulled out the black blade and the sky-splitting bow from the back of the David's deer. Then, he stealthily slipped towards the battlefield. The sound grew increasingly louder as he got closer to the place. He could now hear angry shouts and painful cries of barbarians. He passed through a forest. Then, a vast stretched open area appeared in front of him. He hid behind a clump of bushes. Then, he started to peep through the cracks. He saw 7 or 8 barbarian men being indulged in a fierce battle with a young girl. The girl wore a leopard skin jacket. The crisp sounds of the collision of their swords could be heard even from such a long distance. Shi Mu's pupils turned golden, and his facial expression changed. That young girl's clothes were that of a barbarian woman. However, she looked like a human owing to her exquisite movements, delicate swordsmanship, and some hard-to-detect details that she carried on her body. Her camouflage was nearly perfect. Shi Mu felt that he wouldn't have noticed this minute difference if he didn't possess an extraordinary eyesight. He saw that the girl held a 3 feet long white sword. Her sword was emitting an intermittent burst of cold white chi. Traces of sparkling silver sword shadows were left behind every time she brandished her sword. They gradually constituted a spherical-shaped sword ring around her body. And, it looked like a snowball that was acting as a shield to protect the girl. The surrounding 7 or 8 barbarians were totem warriors. They possessed the strength of Hotian middle-stage warriors. They had long green blades in their hands. Their blades were glittering and flickering as they moved up and down like nimble leopard cats. But, they couldn't penetrate the girl's defensive ring, no matter what attack and angle they resorted to. However, the girl's clothing was heavily smeared with blood. Even her face looked pale. It seemed that she had received plenty of wounds over her body. 3 corpses of the barbarians lay on the ground nearby. A slender cut could be seen on the throats of each one of them. It seemed that they had been slaughtered by the girl's sword. The young girl seemed quite proficient in the sword art. But, her physical strength couldn't support her exquisite moves anymore since it had nearly reached its limit. The barbarians had also noticed her condition. Therefore, they had gathered around her, and were making random attacks. They weren't trying hard to kill her. Instead, they were waiting for the time when her strength would get consumed in its entirety. Shi Mu's hesitation died down as he noticed this situation. His hand slipped towards his back, and pulled out the sky-splitting bow. Meanwhile, the girl's face had turned red, and her eyes were sparkling with exertion. A fit of an uncontrollable coughing came over her. Even the sword in her hand started to quiver. The ring of sword shadows around her body also revealed a little crack. One of the barbarian men gleamed with happiness as he saw this. The green blade in his hand transformed into a green lightning, and broke through the sword ring via the tiny crack. He then attacked the girl on her neck. It was clear that he wanted to cut off the girl's head. The girl's eyes flashed. Her dazzling silver sword quivered, and shot out a sparkling sword shadow. The shadow flashed, and collided with the barbarian's blade. Clang! Her sword cut the barbarian man's blade in 2 halves with a loud sound. She then flicked her wrist, and thrust her sword forward at a lightning speed. Her sword moved so fast that it was almost impossible to see its trail in the air. Only a cold light could be vaguely seen. The big barbarian man held his arm up along with the green blade to dodge the attack. But, his raised arm was cut off from his shoulder before he could understand anything. Several thin red lines emerged around his neck at the same time. He staggered back while covering his throat with his other hand, and started to issue heart-curdling screeches. Then, he tumbled down on the ground. Mang! The other barbarians called out loudly. They were taken over by sorrow and resentment at the same time. But, they didn't dare to rush towards the girl. Instead, they started to brandish their blades more forcefully. This continual movement formed a compressed blade net. The barbarians then forced the blade net towards the girl. The girl's internal injuries had been affected by killing the tall barbarian. A trace of pain floated into her eyes. She opened her mouth, and spat out a mouthful of blood. Her sword also became sluggish and listless. The surrounding barbarians had learnt their lesson. So, they didn't dare to make any rash movement. And, they continued to wield their blades in order to exhaust her to death. Chapter 148, A Misunderstanding. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Suddenly, an ear-piercing sound was heard. Then, a shadow flashed. It was a black light that had been projected from the nearby woods. It was as swift as a startling thunderclap in the night sky. It flashed and sank into the chest of one of the barbarians. The tall barbarian's body turned upside down, and shot backwards forcefully as if he had been struck by a monstrous creature. He got knocked against the trunk of a huge tree. This rendered a powerful jolt to the tree. The tree trembled violently, several leaves fell off its branches. The lifeless body of the barbarian hung in midair with a long black arrow sticking out of his chest. The sharp end of the arrow had sunk deep into the tree's bough, the plume feathers at the arrow's end were still quivering. The barbarian's mouth was wide open. There was a trace of alarmed expression on his face. He had been struck so hard that he couldn't even let out a pitiful scream. The glow of his eyes gradually subsided. His powerless feet twitched a couple of times. Then, his body became motionless. The remaining barbarians and the girl clad in the leopard jacket girl were startled as they saw this. Whiz! Whiz! Two black lights darted out before they could even turn their heads. The two lights had been shot at an extremely fast speed, so much so that the naked eye couldn't even capture the exact trajectory of those lights. Ah! Ah! Two blood-curdling screeches resounded at the same time. Two of the barbarians had been shot in their chests by the long arrows. They were thrown backwards upside down. They soon met with a violent death. A shadow flashed once again. Another arrow appeared at an alarming speed. A miraculous gleam flashed across the fiery red eyes of one of the barbarians. His eyes looked like a pair of snake's eyes. He brandished his long blade. It streaked an arc in midair in an attempt to cut down the black arrow. However, his expectations had gone wrong. There was a powerful collision between the blade and the arrow. It transmitted a powerful shock to his body. He couldn't help but drew a step backwards. A hint of amazement flashed across his eyes. The arrow wasn't only as quick as the electric current, but its implication was also quite alarming. What are you guys looking at? Do you want to die? Let's activate the binding blade spell. Only then, we'll be able to block these arrows, the red-eyed barbarian shouted loudly. Other barbarians were jolted out of their state of stupefaction. They left the side of the girl, and rushed to form an encirclement. They stood in a circle with their backs against each other. Their movement looked extremely harmonious and coordinated. Their swift movements exhibited a splendid portrayal of mutual understanding. 4 barbarian men stood at the 4 corners. They started to brandish their steel blades. The continual movement of blades gave rise to a green whirlwind. The whirlwind proliferated and formed a defensive shield around them. It seemed to be impenetrable in nature. Whiz! A black arrow was ejected like an electric current. Its speed was as fast as a bolt of lightning. The black light knocked against the green whirlwind, it seemed as if the arrow had knocked against a soft wall. However, the arrow had been blocked. The blade light flashed, and chopped the long arrow in several pieces. The broken fragments of the arrow then dispersed on the ground. The red-eyed barbarian heaved a sigh of relief as he saw this. A malicious glint crept across his eyes. Then, he fumbled out a scorpion from a small bag hung from his waist with an almost indiscernible movement of his right hand. It was as big as a human fist. After that, he tossed the scorpion in the direction where Shi Mu was hidden. The scorpion had been thrown with such speed that it left a black trail of afterimages behind it. The girl in the leopard jacket finally felt a little relieved. She staggered a few steps backwards, and opened her mouth to gasp for breath. She then shot a sidelong glance at the small scorpion that had been thrown by the red-eyed barbarian. Her charming face turned unsightly. She was about to call out and warn the archer. Right then, a muffled sound was heard from the nearby woods. Then, a red light flashed. The small black scorpion flew back upside down. It had been torn into 2 pieces. It fell to the ground. It made some futile struggles. Then, it stopped moving. The red-eyed barbarian's complexion changed. His eyes revealed a frightened and a furious look at the same time. The girl in the leather jacket was also shocked. Suddenly, a green arrow was shot like an electric current. The arrow had been aimed at the red-eyed barbarian. The red-eyed barbarian noticed that the color of this arrow was different than the previous ones. But, he didn't panic as he had extreme confidence in his binding blade spell. Instead, he gently fumbled in his waist bag. It seemed as if he was about to make another move. The green arrow arrived in front of him in a fraction of a second. The whirlwind of the blades was annihilated like a piece of paper with a light sound. The 4 sturdy barbarians were shaken by the impact. They retreated by several steps. They couldn't even hold onto their blades. The red-eyed barbarian was flabbergasted since he had been caught off guard. He became desperate, and quickly swung his blade. Over a dozen of blade shadows appeared in front of his body in the form of a shield. Bang! A loud rumble was heard. The blade shadows couldn't withstand the formidable attack of the green arrow. They were rooted and dispersed in a flash. The red-eyed barbarian revealed an unbelievable look on his face. The arrow then pierced his chest with a terrifying speed before he could understand anything. Chasing wind. He wanted to speak something, but he couldn't finish his sentence. Suddenly, his body was lifted and thrown into the air by a gigantic force. He was sent flying upside down almost 10 feet backwards. Then, he collapsed to the ground. He rolled on the ground a few times. After that, he stopped breathing. The other 4 barbarian men felt as if their hearts had been deeply penetrated. They immediately broke the formation, turned around, and fled towards a distant place without uttering a single word. Whiz! 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 Several green lights darted towards them one after another. Even the fastest one of them could only escape for a distance of 20 feet before he was nailed to the ground in a firm manner. Now, the open area had attained its tranquility once again. Magic arrows! The girl's vision flashed. She murmured as she gazed at the abstruse magic patterns drawn on the surface of the green arrows. Shi Mu's silhouette emerged from the woods after a short while. There was a long slit with a big hole on his clothing. Apparently, he had been attacked by the small black scorpion. Shi Mu gently stroked his chest, his eyes flashed with a hint of lingering fear. That small black scorpion possessed the strength of a Hotian primary stage warrior. However, its speed was so startling that it had far surpassed his range. He would have been dead by now if not for his extraordinary eyesight. Shi Mu could tell at a glance that the scorpion's shiny black tail contained some kind of a vicious venom. It was impossible to imagine what would have happened if its tail had made the tiniest scratch on his skin. "You're a human?" The girl sized Shi Mu up from top to bottom. Then, she asked in an unassertive tone. "That's right. I'm Shi Mu, a disciple of the Black Demon sect." May I know your excellency's identity? Shi Mu looked at the girl and asked. The girl hesitated for a moment. Then, she asked another question instead of giving him a reply. Do you have anything that can prove your identity? Shi Mu was left dumbstruck. His brows slightly creased. However, he fished out a black token from his pocket, and shook it gently before the girl's eyes. It was the identity card used by the disciples of the Black Demon sect. The girl's complexion changed as she saw the identity card. So, you're indeed Brother Shi. I'm Tian Huowu of the Tianyin sect. Thank you so much for rescuing me. I must apologize for my impoliteness. The girl cupped her hands across her chest in obeisance as she spoke up. I never expected that I'd bump into a disciple of one of the 7 big sects here in the barbarians' wasteland. It's a pleasure to meet you, Shi Mu said. Tian Huowu smiled. She was about to say something when her complexion became pale. She then spouted a mouthful of blood. Her body quivered in exertion, and she tumbled backwards. Shi Mu hurriedly leapt forward and supported her shoulder. He then propped her back against a big tree, and made her sit in a comfortable position. Thank you so much. Tian Huowu managed to smile. She then took out a delicate jade bottle from her bosom. She tilted the bottle, a red pill rolled down on her cloth. Suddenly, her facial expression changed and her body stiffened. Sister Tian, what's the matter? Shi Mu asked in a surprised tone. Tian Huowu moved her wrist before Shi Mu could complete his sentence. Then, the white sword in her hand transformed into a white light as she thrust it towards Shi Mu's chest like a bolt of lightning. Shi Mu was startled. He stomped his foot on the ground, and shot backwards. Swish! The attack had been made from an extremely short distance. So, Shi Mu couldn't dodge it even though his response had been prompt. His shirt had been slashed by the sword. A big hole appeared on his shirt. The flesh on his chest became exposed. In fact, he had only been a hair's breadth away from being lacerated. Shi Mu's complexion darkened. He was enraged. He was about to shout out in anger. Despicable barbarian, how dare you pretend to be a human? You've invited your death, Tian Huowu jumped and shouted at him. Then, she braced herself to pounce on him. The sword in her hand flickered like a white lightning. She then pointed it at Shi Mu, and started to stab at several parts of his body. She didn't show the slightest sign of mercy. Shi Mu swayed his body from side to side in an attempt to dodge her strikes. Meanwhile, a golden light glittered in his eyes. He thrust his sword extremely fast, and hit Tian Huowu on her wrist. The girl issued a muffled groan. Her shining white sword slipped from her hand, and fell to the ground. Shi Mu lifted the sword with the tip of his toe, and wielded it in his hand. After that, his figure flashed, and leapt several feet backwards. He then stood in a firm manner. Tian Huowu's complexion turned deathly pale. She spouted a little blood once again. She staggered a step backwards, and propped herself against a big tree. Otherwise, she would have toppled over. The luster of her beautiful face had faded away. Her pale face looked transparent. Her body was quivering in a continuous manner. She knelt down on the ground while leaning against the trunk of the big tree. She had luckily escaped the attacks of the Earth-grade barbarian. But, her body had received several internal injuries while fighting with him. Then, she had got trapped in a fierce battle with several other barbarians. This had flared up her wounds and internal injuries. She had used a secret technique to suppress her wounds in an effective manner. However, it had backfired, and her wounds had been fully exposed. Tian Huowu turned her head and looked at the white pill that had been dropped on the ground. She wanted to consume it. But unfortunately, she had dropped it. She stretched out her hand to pick it up. But, her hand was trembling like a shriveled old man's. Therefore, the pill continued to slip through her fingers multiple times. Suddenly, two slender fingers picked up the white pill, and brought it close to her mouth. Tian Huowu looked up to see Shi Mu, who had come to her side. He was squatting beside her, and was watching her with gentle and calm eyes. She gazed into Shi Mu's eyes for a while. Then, she opened her mouth and swallowed the pill. Shi Mu had noticed her hesitation. Therefore, he stood up and moved a few steps backwards. Tian Huowu revealed a puzzled expression on her face as she saw this. She then sat down with her legs crossed. A layer of faint white light bubbled up on the surface of her body after a moment. Then, the white light began to wrap around her. It was exuding a burst of cold qi. The ground around her covered with hoarfrost with the passage of time. A trace of astonishment flashed across Shi Mu's eyes. He could tell that she was at the Hotian later stage based on the strength of her real qi. But, it was still impossible for her to achieve this. She must have achieved this feat owing to the pill she had just consumed. She finally opened her eyes after a long time. Her complexion had almost returned to its normal state. She stood up while looking at Shi Mu with a perplexed expression in her eyes. Sister Tian, you've misunderstood me. Can it be due to this totem? Shi Mu smiled bitterly. Shi Mu pulled open his robe and revealed his robust muscles. A red python's totem could seen on his chest. The tattoo looked even brighter than before, it looked even more vivid. Humph! You bear the barbarian's totem on your chest. This proves that you're a barbarian. But, you pretend to be a disciple of the Black Demon sect. May I know what you wish to accomplish with this fake identity? Tian Huowu's cheeks turned red as she glanced at the python's totem inflicted on Shi Mu's chest. She then retracted her vision and asked. Do you believe that your hypocritical help would make me believe in you and your fictional story? She added. Hehe, this thing on my chest isn't a barbarian totem. It's a totem curse. Shi Mu let out a soft sigh. Then, he recounted the entire story right from the beginning, the time when his stronghold Rat's Nest had been invaded, to that unpropitious time when he had got inflicted with this so-called curse, the eternally doomed soul spell. After this incident, I probed around and finally collected the required information. An Earth-grade powerhouse or even higher-ranking elder would be needed to seal this curse. Otherwise, I'll have to learn this secret totem technique of the fierce snake tribe. I'll have to seal an even fiercer beast's soul than the one which is already sealed inside me. I'm not capable enough to ask an Earth-grade elder to help me. So, I didn't have any choice but to sneak into the wasteland. I've come here to try my luck, Shi Mu explained in an unperturbed voice. Chapter 149, Together to the Holy Mountain. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Tian Huowu's complexion changed as she heard Shi Mu's story. In fact, she was lost in thoughts by the time Shi Mu finished narrating his story. She was aware that the Rat's Nest stronghold had been attacked by the barbarians. So, she was bound to believe what Shi Mu was saying since she was unable to find any loophole in his story. She had even heard about few of the curse magic arts of the barbarian tribe owing to the experienced and knowledgeable masters of the Tianyin sect. Moreover, Shi Mu wouldn't have saved her if he wanted to hurt her. He could have easily killed her when she was seriously wounded. The girl seemed to be quite rational. She understood that it would have been quite convenient for Shi Mu to kill her if he was a barbarian. She blushed as this thought crossed her mind. She asked, "This explanation isn't enough, these are just spoken words. I won't be convinced until and unless you show me some proof." There was a trace of embarrassment on Shi Mu's face since he didn't hold any substantial proof. "Sister Tian, if you don't believe me, then there's nothing that I can do about it. So, I'll take my leave now." Shi Mu was a little angry. So, he spoke up with a cold expression on his face, and started to walk away. "Wait a minute, give me my sword back." Tian Huowu's vision flashed as she stretched out her hands. Shi Mu wrinkled his brows. He then picked up the long silver sword that lay beside a barbarian corpse, and handed it over to Tian Huowu. Tian Huowu grabbed the hilt of the sword, and exposed a smile on her face. But then, the long silver sword transformed into a silver phantom as she shook her hand. It seemed as if a thunderbolt had struck Shi Mu's chest. Shi Mu didn't get the time to understand anything. His body fell and shot out in a flash. He was shot 100 feet backwards, and landed on the ground. His complexion became ashen. The gigantic snake totem on his chest cracked open, and blood started to exude out of his wound. Sister Tian, what do you mean by this? Do you really wish to fight with me? Shi Mu asked in a cold voice. Tian Huowu didn't reply. She lifted her sword, and looked at the stains of blood on the tip of the sword. Since you can't give any proof, I'll see for myself, she smiled and replied. She then took out a thumb-sized pearl from her bosom. It seemed to be made up of some kind of a transparent jade stone. A few strange charm characters could faintly be seen on the surface of that pearl. It seemed to be a magic tool. The angry look on Shi Mu's face vanished at the sight of this pearl. He wrinkled his brows as he saw Tian Huowu's movements. Tian Huowu mumbled something. Then, the pearl started to emit a faint white light. She then shook her wrist, and discharged a drop of blood from the sword on the pearl. Shao! A strange sound was issued. The transparent pearl issued a white light. It then transformed into a grey light. A group of grey clouds and mist started to appear at the same time. They then started to roll inside the body of the pearl. Huowu looked for a while. Then, she nodded and returned the pearl to her chest pocket. The totem on your chest has a deep aura of a curse. It seems that you've told me the truth. This is some kind of a witchcraft curse, Tian Huowu spoke up. Shi Mu nodded. However, he didn't say anything. Brother Shi, I'm really very sorry. I know that what I did a moment ago was extremely disrespectful. But, I have a huge responsibility to fulfill. A minor carelessness on my part can lead to a series of incalculable aftermaths. So, I had to test you. I ask for your forgiveness, Tian Huowu bowed in front of Shi Mu and said. What do you mean by that? Shi Mu's anger dissipated as he saw Tian Huowu's sincere attitude. He then asked in a calm manner. I'm a disciple of the Tianyin sect. I'm also the princess of the Dachi kingdom. Tian Huowu forced a smile on her face. She then shared her experience on the island that had been surrounded by the three kingdoms. She also told Shi Mu that she had a special status. So, the Union had assigned her the task to go into the Holy Land of Barbarians in order to negotiate a treaty. She also told him about the attacks that she had faced during her journey. Shi Mu's complexion changed as he heard this. He had spent several days in the depth of the wasteland. However, he didn't know about the peace talks between the human race and the barbarian race. Moreover, the information regarding the sea race had made him restless. It seems from your expressions that you weren't aware of these things, right? Princess Huowu asked in a surprising tone. Yes. I entered the wasteland several months ago. I didn't hear this news at that time. The alarmed expression on Shi Mu's face slowly vanished. He then said. Now, he was thinking about the impact of this news on his trip to the fierce snake tribe. Princess Huowu noticed that Shi Mu was lost in his thoughts. There was a trace of hesitation on her face. She then asked, this woman was rude to Brother Shi a moment ago. There's so much for Brother Shi to say. But, may I ask Brother Shi a favor? Will you please listen to me? Shi Mu looked at her, but didn't reply. He spoke up after a while, Your Majesty bears a heavy responsibility on her shoulders. So, she'll have to be extremely cautious. I'm not narrow-minded. Please tell me what you wish to ask. As Brother Shi now knows, the negotiating troops have been wiped out completely. I'm the only one who is left. I'm also seriously injured. There is a holy mountain of the barbarian race, it'll take a month to reach there from this place. Moreover, the journey is full of troubles and misfortunes. Brother Shi, as a disciple of the seven sects, can you please escort me to the holy mountain of the barbarian race? I have to meet the high priest of the barbarians at that place, Princess Huowu requested in a sincere manner. Shi Mu's brows wrinkled as he heard this. This was the matter of safety of the human race. Moreover, he hailed from the Dachi kingdom. So, it would be his duty to escort Princess Huowu to that place. However, it would take him at least 2 months in doing so. He didn't have much time because of the curse on his body. In fact, there would be no hope left for him if he accompanied the princess on this trip. Brother, she doesn't need to worry about the totem curse. It's very important to talk to the barbarians right now. But, I'll find an opportunity, and request the high priest to practice the totem cultivation method of the fierce snake tribe. It wouldn't cost you anything, it'll be the union's responsibility. Even if the high priest won't agree, then you can return to the headquarters of the union in Tianqing Shan with me. I'm a favored disciple of Elder Gongsun. He knows many earth-ranked methods through which your curse can be sealed. It seemed that Princess Huowu had understood Shi Mu's concerns. She then spoke up with a faint smile on her face. Well, I'll risk my life to accompany you for this noble cause. I'll go with you. Shi Mu thought for a while. Then, he made a firm decision and promised in reply. There was no certainty of sealing his totem curse if he went to the fierce snake tribe in order to acquire their totem cultivation method. However, there were better chances of success if he escorted Princess Huowu to the Holy Mountain. Shi Mu could find other ways even if the high priest refused to help him. After all, the Holy Mountain was considered as the holy land of the barbarians. So, there must be other ways to deal with such witchcraft curses in a place like that. Princess Huowu made a promise to Shi Mu with a happy expression on her face. This place isn't safe to stay any longer. We should immediately set out on our journey, Princess Huowu spoke up. Suddenly, her complexion turned white. She then issued a low cough. You're seriously injured. Please find a place to rest for tonight. We'll set out on our journey tomorrow morning, Shi Mu's vision flashed as he said. Princess Huowu wrinkled her brows since the feeling of suffocation in her chest was quite intense. Her wounds had been covered with cotton wadding to control excessive bleeding. However, her injuries would get worse if she continued her journey. Well, but these corpses, Princess Huowu nodded. She then asked in a hesitant manner. Leave it to me, Shi Mu said as he advanced towards the corpses of the barbarians. He started to search their pockets without any hesitation. However, he could only find a few golden foliages. He felt a little disappointed at his loot. After that, he put the corpses in one place. He then took out an animal skin from his bosom. A few red charm characters were engraved on the animal skin. It was a fireball magic charm. Shi Mu had purchased these paper charms a fortnight before coming to the barbarian wasteland. These paper charms were made up of the skin of some vicious animals, they were refined with some raw materials of the barbarians. Shi Mu had accidentally discovered that these animal skin paper charms had the capability to sustain the paper charms of the human race. Moreover, they were better than the ordinary charms. A red light flashed in his finger. Then, the paper charm transformed into a ball of fire. Shi Mu dropped it onto the pile of corpses. The flames burned for a moment. Then, the corpses of the barbarians were turned into ashes. Next day, early in the morning, inside an uncultivated place in the forest near the oasis, Shi Mu sat cross-legged in an open place. He was meditating and breathing smoothly with a tranquil expression on his face. Brother Shi, Princess Huowu's voice was heard from behind. Shi Mu opened his eyes and turned his head. A glimmer of surprise was exposed on his face. A huge and strange barbarian man wearing grey leather clothes was approaching him. He had red skin, and a yellow beard. Shi Mu would have taken him to be a barbarian man if not for the princess's voice. You're Princess Huowu. Si Mu was flabbergasted. He. Who else can I be? I learnt this easy disguising technique from the masters of my sect. My previous disguise has been seen by other barbarians. So, it's better to change it this time. Oh, by the way, you should also change your look, Huo Wu chuckled and said. Shi Mu nodded. No one had recognized him in the wasteland so far. But, he still looked a little like a human. So, changing his looks could avoid a lot of trouble. Princess Huo Wu's disguising technique was extremely polished. Shi Mu transformed himself into a 40-year-old dark-skinned barbarian man within half an hour. Shi Mu was stunned to see his reflection in a small puddle. He was surprised by the abilities of Princess Huo Wu's disguising technique. In the dead spirit world, a chill wind was whistling in the sky. A row of blood moons was suspended in the black sky. Shi Mu would have been surprised to see that there was one blood moon less. Now, there were only 11 blood moons. However, each of the blood moons had become bigger than before. But, the creatures on the ground didn't seem to care about the change in the number of the blood moons. Everyone's behavior was the same as before. The piece of land under the barren hill seemed as if it had just experienced a war. Broken bones were spread everywhere on the ground. The cold wind was blowing through this area with a whistling sound. It sounded as sad as the devil's voice. A few skeletons of zombies, horsemen knights, and vicious beasts could also be seen apart from the remains of ordinary human skeletons. Suddenly, a green light flashed in one of the skulls in that pile of human skeletons. 2 green spirit fires seemed to have been ignited. Half of this skeleton's body, including the feet and the left arm, had disappeared without a trace. Only its chest cavity remained intact. His skull and his right arm were still linked to his chest. The skeleton took support of the earth with its one hand, and stood up with great difficulty. It then looked at its remaining body. The green flames in its eye socket shook. It seemed a little depressed. This skeleton was Yan Luo. Chapter 150, The White Horse Mountain. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Yan Luo started to crawl with the support of its right arm. Many cracks had appeared in its thoracic cavity and rib while fighting in the war. But, its skull, right arm and the joint between the shoulder and the right arm didn't have any crack. It crawled around for a moment. It then collected all kinds of bones from the remains of the other skeletons in order to assemble its own body. It had put together the bones of its body in a proficient manner in a short while. Yan Luo moved its hands and feet. It then stood up and started to walk around in the battlefield. It then arrived beside a grey human skeleton that had been chopped into 2 sections. The mild green soul flame hadn't completely extinguished from the eye sockets of the grey human skull. Yan Lu raised its foot and stepped onto the grey skull. Kaka! A cracking sound was heard. The grey skull broke and split open. A mist of green light floated out of it, and Yan Luo sucked it into its mouth. Several skeletons with extinguishing soul flames could be seen lying in the battlefield. Yan Luo ran around, and swallowed the soul flames of more than 10 human skulls. The color of its soul flame became bright green from faint green as a result. Its strength was also increased by a great margin. Now, its eye sockets had transformed into 2 bright green torches. Suddenly, the cracks on its body began to heal. The cracks continued to become fainter until they completely disappeared. Yan Luo stood firm after a short while. The green flame in its eye sockets throbbed twice. Suddenly, it got a sense of understanding. It quickly came near a silver-white human skeleton that hadn't yet died. Yan Luo quietly looked at it. The green soul flames flickered several times in its eyes. It seemed as if Yan Luo was pondering over something. The silver-white skeleton looked at the broken skeletons beside it. The faint green flames in its eye sockets trembled a little. It seemed that it was afraid. Suddenly, Yan Luo bent down. It then picked up the silver-white skull, and opened its mouth to inhale. A green light floated out of the silver-white skull, and went into Yan Luo's mouth. The soul flame in Yan Luo's eye sockets changed, and started to roll up like a fountain. It opened its mouth a moment later, and spat out a little green flame. Then, the light got submerged into the silver-white skull in Yan Luo's hand. A ray of light flashed in the silver skull. Then, 2 green flames appeared. The soul flame in Yan Luo's eyes throbbed once again. Yan Luo then placed the silver skull on its headless body. A loud creaking sound was heard. The silver-white human skeleton stood up, it was swaying and shaking. Its body was much bigger than that of Yan Luo's. It crawled and knelt near Yan Luo's feet. Yan Luo raised its head and issued a gentle whistling sound. Then, it turned around and started to walk towards another place. The silver-white skeleton stood up, and started to walk behind Yan Luo. Half a day later, Yan Luo departed from the battlefield. 2 human skeletons were following it. They were walking into the distance as they shook and swayed. 1 month later, somewhere in the northwest direction of the barbarian wasteland. The barbarian wasteland was no more a desolate barren land. Red flowers and green grasses were seen as far as one could see. In fact, a dense forest and a flowing river could be seen in place of the previously barren land. The river was flowing rapidly. Its water was so clear that the bottom of the river was visible. A tall mountain stood at the end of that river, it was several thousand feet high. The entire mountain was white in color. It seemed to be made up of a strange bony rock. It seemed like a huge foot of a horse from afar. It was raised upward like a white horse. Therefore, the barbarian clansmen used to call it the White Horse Mountain. The White Horse Mountain held an unusual significance in the eyes of the barbarians. It was said that the ancient giants were born within the radius of 100 kilometers from this mountain. Therefore, the area was known as the Holy Land, and the White Horse Mountain was known as the Holy Mountain. A snow-white palace had been built on an extremely tall peak of the White Horse Mountain. It was a place of pilgrimage for the barbarian race. The high priest also lived there. It was known as the Holy Snow Palace. A man and a woman stood side by side on the top of a small hill near the mountain peak. They were looking into the distance towards the White Horse Mountain. The man was wearing a grey wolf-furred cloak, and was riding a David's deer. The woman was wearing a fox-furred cloak, and was riding a brown barbarian horse. These 2 people had arrived there trudging all the way. They were none other than Shi Mu and Princess Huo Wu. These 2 people had changed their appearances several times along the journey to avoid the vicious barbarians. This had worked for them throughout the journey. Now, they had finally arrived near the Holy Mountain. So, the 2 of them had changed back to their original appearances a day before. But, they were still dressed as barbarian people. Shi Mu drew his gaze back to the hilltop. Several barbarian barracks could be seen on a piece of land behind the foot of the White Horse Mountain. All the houses in the barracks were made up of white rock. The barrack wasn't too big, only 200 or 300 men were stationed there to guard the only entrance of the mountain. "Brother Shi, let's go." A trace of excitement flashed through Princess Huo Wu's eyes as she saw the Holy Snow Palace. She then exhaled a long breath and said. She then straddled on the barbarian horse, and started to lead the way towards the barbarian barrack in a fast speed. Shi Mu pressed his legs gently into his David's deer, and started to follow her. "Stop! This isn't the time for pilgrimage. Those who enter the holy mountain without permission will be killed mercilessly." Suddenly, 2 people appeared in front of the barrack. A guard from the small group of barbarian soldiers moved the weapon in his hand to block Shi Mu and the princess even though they had already dismounted from their animals. "I'm Princess Huo Wu of the Dachi Kingdom. I've come to discuss an important matter with the High Priest on behalf of the 7 sects of the human race." Princess Huo Wu's elegant eyebrows wrinkled as she introduced herself. A red cloth was tied on the head of the guard. He seemed to be the leader of the group. He stared at them blankly for a while. He hesitated for a moment, and whispered a few words in the other barbarian's ear. He then lifted his head, but didn't speak. After that, he looked more carefully at these 2 humans who looked like barbarians. The barbarian soldier ran towards the barrack as soon as he received the command. A middle-aged gloomy barbarian man with 3 fiery red feathers inserted in his headband arrived on a horse from inside the barrack after a short while. The small group of barbarian soldiers on the entrance made way for him as they saw him coming. The leader was still watching Shi Mu and the princess with vigilant eyes. I'm Aguna, the leader of the guards of this barrack. You two are claiming to be the emissaries of the 7 big sects of the human race. Can you show me some proof? The middle-aged barbarian man shot a doubtful glance at the two humans. He then spoke with a cold expression on his face. This is my emissary order token given by the 7 big sects under their own administration. There's no way to fake it. High Priest will easily distinguish it when he sees this. Princess Huowu's expression didn't change. She took out a white jade order token from her bosom and said. This white jade order token looked like a simple jade in appearance. But, several charms characters were carved on its surface, and they made it look rather mysterious. One could easily tell that it wasn't an ordinary jade. Hehe, do you know the status of the High Priest? How did you think that I'll allow you to see him? I'll take this token for inspection. If it's real, then I'll report to the High Priest myself, Aguna spoke up with a mischievous laughter. Princess Huowu hesitated and looked at Shi Mu. Shi Mu whispered something to the princess. Then, Princess Huowu thought for a while, and threw the token towards Aguna. Aguna caught the white jade token, and put in his bosom without looking at it. Come on people, arrest these human spies. Aguna's complexion sank. He then turned his head and said. Suddenly, 100 or more barbarian soldiers rushed out from the barracks. There were more than 10 totem warriors among these people. They quickly surrounded Shi Mu and Princess Huowu. It seemed as if they were already prepared for this. The front row of pikes had already set their levels. The pikes in their hands were ready to take off. More than 10 totem warriors began to activate their totem power, and their bodies started to swell up. Princess Huowu's complexion changed. Suddenly, a white light flashed in her waist. Then, a white flexible sword appeared in her hand. A bright and magnificent drizzle of snow rose up in a flash. She seemed to be ready for a battle. Shi Mu's expression didn't change. He kept his hand on the hilt of his black blade. The red charm characters on the surface of the blade brightened up. He then stared at Aguna with ice-cold expression in his eyes. It seemed as if he was looking at a dead person. Then, a curve appeared at the corner of his mouth. What's wrong? Do you still think that you can resist us? Don't you know what place this is? Aguna felt a little scared as he saw Shi Mu's ice-cold eyes. But, he still bore a calm expression on his face. He had just lifted his hand in order to give orders when a deep dignified voice fell into his ear. This is the place for calm cultivation of the High Priest. Aguna, do you think that this is your fierce snake tribe? A tall barbarian man walked out from the barracks. He was wearing a blue leather gown. A strand of fierce blue teeth was hung around his neck as a necklace. He was carrying a gigantic hammer made up of blue stone on his shoulder. It seemed to be 500 kilograms in weight. Shi Mu looked at Aguna's chest as soon as he heard these words. He then narrowed his eyes to look at his totem. Lord Wulan, I've just discovered that these two people are human spies. There's nothing inappropriate in arresting them. Aguna's complexion changed. He spoke up without lowering his raised arm. Lord Wulan, I'm Princess Huowu of the Dachi Kingdom. I'm a representative of the 7 big sects of human race. I've important matters to discuss with the High Priest. Aguna has kept my emissary order token in his bosom. I request Lord Wulan to see it. A happy expression flashed in Princess Huowu's eyes as she took a glance at the necklace in the tall barbarian's neck. Aguna, give me her order token. I wish to see it. The big barbarian in the blue leather gown turned his head and stared at Aguna. He then said. Aguna's complexion changed. He took out the white jade order token of Princess Huowu from his bosom, and handed it over to Wulan. Wulan held the token in his hand, and looked at it with an expressionless face. Then, he placed it on his forehead. He put down the white jade token after a while. Then, a smile appeared on his face. These two people are emissaries of the human race. All of you, back off. Wu Lan waved his hand to indicate the barbarians surrounding Shi Mu. The barbarians quickly returned to the barrack as they heard this. "Aguna, do you also wish to examine this emissary order token?" Wu Lan swayed the white jade order token in his hand. He then looked towards Aguna and asked. "Sure." Aguna stretched his hand to receive the white jade order token. He took it, but soon returned it resentfully. He then stood there without speaking a single word. "Aguna, don't forget that you are now the leader of the guards of the Holy Snow Palace. You must pay attention to your duties and responsibilities." Wu Lan looked at Aguna with ice-cold expression in his eyes. A wisp of the tyrannical and imposing aura of a Xian Tian level powerhouse was unleashed from his body at this time. Aguna sensed the powerful and intangible aura rushing around Wu Lan's body. He couldn't help but draw a few steps backwards. His face turned red. He then issued a regretting sound, and hurriedly backed away.